The courtroom was quiet, with the usual shuffle of papers and soft murmurs of lawyers preparing their cases. The judge, a seasoned veteran of the legal system, sat at the front, peering over her glasses at the proceedings below. The tension in the room was palpable as the case was about to reach a critical point. All eyes were on the opposing lawyers as they presented their final arguments. But just when it seemed like the case would continue as expected, the doors of the courtroom suddenly swung open. A figure entered the room with a certain presence, tall, confident, and unmistakably familiar. Elon Musk, the billionaire tech mogul, was here. There was a subtle buzz among the audience, the hushed whispers of excitement filling the space. Musk had a reputation for his bold moves and unpredictable nature, but no one in this courtroom was prepared for what would come next. Musk walked briskly toward the front of the room, his eyes scanning the people around him as though he was already familiar with the legal battle being fought. As he reached the table where his lawyers sat, he did something that no one in the room had ever expected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver badge. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. For a brief moment, the entire room was frozen. The badge gleamed under the courtroom lights, and everyone's attention was instantly focused on it. It wasn't just any badge. It was a United States Secret Service USSS badge. Musk stood there, looking calm and collected, but the implications of what he had just done were anything but. There was no denying it. He was flashing a badge that granted him unprecedented power, access to the highest levels of security, influence, and, most importantly, protection. The room erupted in confusion, whispers filling the air as attorneys exchanged puzzled glances. The judge, clearly caught off guard, sat up straighter in her chair, her expression shifting from composed to concerned. "Mr. Musk," the judge finally spoke, her voice betraying the surprise that was no doubt running through her mind. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Musk didn't flinch. He simply placed the badge on the table in front of him, his fingers lingering on it for just a second before he looked up and addressed the court. "I'm not here to disrupt the proceedings," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an air of authority that was unmistakable. "I'm here because I believe this case involves more than just legalities. It involves security, influence, and the future of a nation. And I have every right to be here." The room fell silent. It wasn't the first time Elon Musk had made headlines for his unconventional behavior, but this was something new, something that sent shockwaves through the room. Flashing a USSS badge wasn't just a statement. It was a direct challenge. A challenge not only to the court but to the system itself. The judge's eyes narrowed as she tried to process the situation. Her role was to maintain order in the court, but Musk's bold move put her in an incredibly awkward position. She had to balance her authority with the fact that Musk was, in a sense, challenging the very foundation of the court's authority. "Mr. Musk," the judge began slowly, choosing her words carefully, "you cannot simply waltz into a courtroom and display a government badge as though it's some sort of personal entitlement. If you have something to add to this case, I expect you to do so through the proper channels." Musk didn't seem fazed. He took a deep breath, knowing this moment was about more than just the case. He was making a statement, not just about this legal battle, but about how he viewed the world and his place in it. He had never been one to conform to the rules, and now, it seemed, he was daring everyone in the room to see the world through his eyes. "I am simply exercising my right to be here as an individual with national interests at heart," Musk replied smoothly. "I trust you'll allow me the space to explain further." The judge opened her mouth to respond, but she was interrupted by the opposing attorney, who had been sitting in stunned silence until now. "Your Honor, this is a blatant attempt to undermine the proceedings. We cannot allow a spectacle like this to go unchallenged." Musk's lawyers exchanged looks, but they, too, seemed unsure of how to proceed. Was this a calculated move, or had Musk gone too far? The tension in the room was palpable. No one had expected this. No one knew how to react. The opposing lawyer continued, raising his voice in a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Mr. Musk is not above the law. He cannot just walk in here and show off a government badge as if it grants him immunity." Elon Musk didn't react to the accusations. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and folded his arms, a small, confident smile playing at the corners of his lips. He wasn't backing down, and the more they challenged him, the more his presence in the room seemed to grow. The badge wasn't just an accessory. It was a symbol of something much bigger than the case at hand. It was a declaration that Musk wasn't just another defendant. He was someone with power, influence, and a network that extended far beyond the walls of the courtroom. "You misunderstand," Musk said, his tone calm but assertive. "This is not about immunity. This is about ensuring that this case does not spiral out of control. The stakes are higher than you realize. And I assure you, if things get out of hand, I have the means to handle it." The judge was visibly frustrated, but maintained composure. "Mr. Musk, I will have you removed from this courtroom if you do not respect the decorum of this court." Musk's smile widened, but there was no malice behind it, just a quiet confidence. "I am simply asking for a moment of understanding. Once you have heard my reasoning, I believe you'll see things differently." The room was tense as everyone waited for the next move. Could Elon Musk really control the situation in such a way? Could his unorthodox approach to the case actually work in his favor? The court was divided. Some saw Musk's actions as a calculated risk, a move to assert dominance in an unfamiliar and potentially hostile environment. Others, however, were starting to question whether Musk had crossed a line. But one thing was certain. The story unfolding in that courtroom would be one that would be talked about for years to come. As the silence hung in the air, all eyes were on the judge. What would she decide? Would she allow this audacious move to stand, or would she remove Musk from the courtroom altogether? The tension was almost unbearable. And that's when the judge did something unexpected. She leaned forward, staring intently at Musk before speaking, her voice steady but with a note of curiosity. "Mr. Musk," she said, her words carrying weight, "you've certainly captured the room's attention, but what I want to know is, why are you here? What is it that you think you can offer this court that hasn't already been presented?" The room fell even quieter. It wasn't just a question. It was an invitation for Musk to explain himself, to make his case, to pull the strings that could potentially turn the tide in his favor. As Musk prepared to respond, he knew that whatever he said next would change the course of the trial. This was no longer just about legal arguments. This was about influence, power, and the way Musk was positioning himself in a world where the rules were constantly being rewritten. And he was just getting started. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The judge's question hung in the air, and the courtroom fell silent, waiting for Elon Musk's next move. His response could either salvage this chaotic moment or drive him into even deeper controversy. Everyone knew Musk was unpredictable, but no one could have expected the audacity he displayed in that instant. The entire room was on edge, each person curious to see if the billionaire tech mogul could justify his actions. Musk sat back, still calm, his fingers lightly tapping on the table in front of him. He looked around at the sea of eyes fixed on him, some filled with skepticism, others with intrigue. His presence, somehow commanding even in such an unexpected moment, filled the space. He let the silence stretch on for just a moment longer, allowing the tension to build. Then, with a small but determined smile, he leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but with an underlying intensity. "Why am I here?" Musk echoed the judge's question, as if considering it for the first time. "I suppose the simple answer is that this case, this legal battle, it's bigger than what you see in this courtroom." He paused, allowing his words to settle in the room. "You see, I don't just see the world as a businessman. I see the future, what it could be, what it should be. I believe that my role, the role of anyone who has access to power, is to protect the future, even when the rules seem to be stacked against us." There was a slight edge to his voice now, a glimpse into the mind of the man who had transformed entire industries. Musk was more than just a businessman. He was a visionary, a disruptor, and he had made a career out of challenging the status quo. "I don't mean to disrespect the court, or you, Your Honor," he continued, his gaze never leaving the judge. "But the stakes here go beyond legalities. There's a bigger picture in play, one that could affect millions, maybe billions, of people. What's at stake here isn't just a lawsuit. It's the future of technology, privacy, security, and what we as a society allow to happen in the face of rapid change. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. She was listening, and so was everyone else. Musk leaned back again, folding his arms across his chest. And that's why I'm here today, not just as a businessman, but as someone who believes in safeguarding the future. The badge? It's a symbol, a reminder that sometimes the rules need to be bent in order to protect something larger than ourselves. You may not understand it yet, but in time, you will. The silence that followed was thick, as if everyone was waiting for the punchline, the reveal that would explain the true nature of Musk's statement. But it never came. Instead, what Musk had just shared was a fragment of his deeper philosophy, a philosophy that, for better or worse, had guided every decision he'd ever made. For those who didn't understand Musk's worldview, his words could sound arrogant or even delusional. But for those who knew him, they recognized it immediately. Musk wasn't just an inventor or an entrepreneur. He was a man with a vision that transcended mere business. He had always believed that the rules, especially in traditional systems, were made to be challenged. The judge's voice broke the silence, sharp and to the point. Mr. Musk, you're making some extraordinary claims here. But none of that changes the fact that you are in a courtroom, under my jurisdiction, and you are not above the law. I will not let this trial become a platform for you to promote your personal agenda, no matter how lofty it may seem. Musk's expression remained unchanged. He nodded respectfully, as if acknowledging the judge's point. I understand, Your Honor. But I'm not here to promote an agenda. I'm here because I believe in protecting what's right, even when it's inconvenient. His words were met with a murmur of agreement from his lawyers, who exchanged glances, wondering what would happen next. This wasn't the usual course of events in a trial, and it was clear that things were spiraling into unfamiliar territory. The opposing counsel, who had been simmering with frustration since Musk's entrance, finally spoke up. Your Honor, he said, rising from his seat, this is absurd. We've seen the stunts Musk has pulled in the past, but this is a step too far. This is a courtroom, not a stage for his personal theatrics. We ask that you immediately dismiss any further participation from Mr. Musk. Musk's attorneys stood in opposition, arguing that Musk's presence was entirely legitimate. They reminded the court that Musk had every right to defend himself and the broader interests that were now intertwined with the case. The judge took a deep breath, clearly exasperated by the growing tension. She had been on the bench for years, but this was unlike any trial she had ever overseen. She needed to regain control. Mr. Musk, she said, her voice hardening, I am giving you one last opportunity to explain your involvement in this case. If you cannot make a compelling argument as to why your participation is necessary, I will have no choice but to have you removed from this courtroom. Musk didn't blink. He knew exactly what was at stake now. The challenge was no longer about the case. It was about his influence and his vision. He had a reputation for not backing down, for pushing boundaries, and this moment was no exception. I'm not here to take control of this trial, Your Honor, he said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. But I am here to make sure that the right questions are asked. The legal world is about to undergo a massive shift, and this case is only a small part of the larger equation. I'm here to ensure that we don't miss an opportunity to safeguard the future. There was a slight pause, and then the judge nodded. Very well, Mr. Musk. I'll allow you to participate, but you will do so within the boundaries of this court's rules. No more disruptions. Musk's smile returned, just a touch. Of course, Your Honor. I wouldn't dream of anything else. With that, the room seemed to exhale, as if the pressure had been lifted. But while the immediate tension had eased, the underlying uncertainty remained. Musk had carved out a space for himself, not just as a defendant, but as a force to be reckoned with. His words, his actions, every moment of this exchange was a subtle reminder that he was playing a much bigger game than anyone could truly understand. The judge gave a final nod, signaling that the trial could proceed. But it was clear now that the dynamics had shifted. This wasn't just about the case anymore. This was about power, influence, and the battle for control over the future. As Musk sat back, his mind was already racing ahead. He had a vision, and no matter what happened in this courtroom, He would make sure that vision was realized. The journey had just begun. The tension in the courtroom lingered long after the judge's decision. Musk's words echoed in everyone's minds, and the dynamics had shifted in ways no one could have predicted. Even the most seasoned courtroom observers were struggling to grasp what had just transpired. They were witnessing history unfolding right before their eyes, but the question remained. Was Musk a genius disruptor, or was he pushing the boundaries of acceptable behavior too far? As the judge signaled for the trial to proceed, there was an unsettling silence. The opposing counsel, though defeated in their attempt to have Musk removed, had not given up their resistance. The courtroom was now divided into two camps, those who supported Musk's unconventional approach and those who saw it as an affront to the very structure of the legal system. The murmurs of the spectators only added to the growing sense of unease. Musk's attorneys, eager to regain control of the narrative, shuffled their papers and prepared to proceed. The brief respite allowed them to recompose themselves, but it was clear that the other side would not relent so easily. In fact, the opposing attorney, Richard Palmer, was already preparing his next move, looking for a way to undermine Musk's influence. Richard Palmer had built his career on taking down tech moguls, on dismantling their empires piece by piece. He saw Elon Musk not as a visionary but as a threat to the balance he'd worked so hard to maintain. Musk's sudden appearance in this trial, flashing a USSS badge, no less, was a direct challenge to his carefully constructed world. As Palmer stood up to continue his argument, he couldn't help but feel a surge of frustration. He had spent years in courtrooms, fighting against some of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world, but none of them had ever been as unpredictable as Musk. "Your Honor," Palmer began, his voice firm and deliberate, "we cannot allow Mr. Musk's blatant disregard for protocol to define the proceedings." His entrance into this courtroom, with all due respect, was an attempt to intimidate the court and sway public opinion. The man is not above the law, and we must make that clear, now more than ever. He shot a glance at Musk, his eyes narrowing. Musk, for his part, seemed unbothered by the attack. His eyes remained fixed on Palmer, not with hostility but with a quiet certainty, as if he were prepared for every challenge Palmer would throw his way. Musk's ability to remain unfazed in the face of intense scrutiny had always been one of his defining characteristics. This courtroom was no different. The judge, having listened to Palmer's arguments, cleared her throat and spoke with authority. "Mr. Palmer, I hear your concerns, but I also acknowledge Mr. Musk's right to be here. This court will continue with the understanding that both sides have a fair opportunity to present their case. Let us not lose sight of the purpose of this trial." The judge's words were decisive, and she turned to Musk's legal team. "Mr. Musk, you will participate as per the court's rules. There will be no further disruptions, and any attempt to bypass protocol will result in immediate consequences." Musk nodded, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Understood, Your Honor. I only wish to ensure that the truth is revealed." With the judge's words hanging in the air, the trial proceeded. But something had shifted. Musk was no longer merely a participant in the case. He was a force that could not be ignored. And as the courtroom settled into the next phase, it was clear that Musk was about to bring something unexpected into the fold. His presence would influence the proceedings in ways no one could foresee. The case itself, initially about corporate malfeasance, was beginning to take on a life of its own. Musk had introduced an element of uncertainty, something the other parties weren't prepared for. For better or worse, they now had to reckon with the reality that Musk was more than just an observer. He was an active participant in this narrative, a participant whose motives remained shrouded in mystery. Musk's lawyers presented their opening statement next. They spoke of innovation, the future of technology, and the dangers of letting outdated systems control the progress of society. They invoked Musk's work with SpaceX and Tesla, arguing that Musk's impact on the world was undeniable. But there was something else in their words, something more than just corporate defense. They subtly hinted that the trial was not merely about the matter at hand, but also about a greater mission to reshape society's view on business, technology, and the future of humanity. Musk's role in the trial was becoming increasingly clear. This wasn't just about defending his company or protecting his legacy. It was about making a statement. The courtroom was a battleground, and Musk was ready to challenge every preconceived notion of power, control, and authority. He had already shown that he was willing to play by his own rules, and the courtroom was just one arena where he would test those boundaries. As the trial continued, it became evident that this case wasn't just going to be a simple legal battle. It was a collision of worldviews, a clash between the establishment and the disruptor. The judge, though determined to maintain order, had to walk a delicate line. She was caught between the traditional legal system and Musk's ability to reshape it. Meanwhile, Palmer's frustration continued to mount. He had hoped that the mere presence of Musk's badge would unnerve the court, forcing a swift resolution. But now he realized that he had underestimated Musk's resolve. Musk wasn't interested in quick fixes or easy wins. He was in this for the long haul. As the day's proceedings came to a close, the judge called for a brief recess. Musk remained seated at the table, his posture relaxed but his mind racing. He had set the stage, but there was still much left to do. This was only the beginning. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered, eager to capture every moment of the drama unfolding inside. Musk's reputation had always attracted attention, but now, it seemed that every move he made in the courtroom was a headline waiting to happen. The media buzz was growing, and the world was watching closely. Whatever happened next, it was certain that this trial would be remembered for years to come. As Musk walked out of the courtroom, he didn't look back. He knew that the battle was far from over. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to lose without making sure everyone understood his vision. This was no longer just about the law. It was about something bigger, something that could change the world. The brief recess was more than just a break for the attorneys. It was an opportunity for everyone involved in the case to recalibrate, to reassess their positions. In the back hallways of the courtroom, conversations were already starting to swirl. The judge's decision to allow Musk to continue participating had sent ripples through the legal community. People who had never heard of the case were now tuning in, wondering what kind of precedent Musk's actions would set. Musk's legal team was huddled in a small conference room, discussing their strategy in whispers. They knew that this was more than just a legal battle. It was a public spectacle, and every move had to be calculated. Musk wasn't just defending himself, he was building a legacy. And in Musk's world, legacy was everything. His chief attorney, Laura Hightower, had been with him through thick and thin. She had seen his career evolve from a few risky ventures to multi-billion-dollar companies that had changed the world. Yet, this trial was unlike anything they had encountered before. "Laura, we need to stick to the facts. Let them have their legal arguments, but we're not here to play by their rules," Musk said, his voice calm yet intense. "What we're doing here goes beyond this case. It's about challenging how people view the future. We need to make them realize what's at stake." Laura nodded, understanding that Musk's perspective was far broader than simply defending himself. His approach to business had always been unconventional, and now, it seemed, he was applying that same methodology to this legal battle. Meanwhile, Palmer was in his own war room, looking over his notes with frustration. He had spent years taking on some of the biggest players in tech, but none of them had been like Musk. None had been as audacious, as untouchable. Musk had turned the tables on him in a way that left him struggling to catch up. Palmer knew he had to make a decisive move, or else he risked losing control of the narrative entirely. The courtroom was Musk's domain now, and Palmer had to figure out how to claw it back. "We need to expose him for what he really is, an egotistical billionaire who thinks the world revolves around his vision," Palmer muttered to his colleagues, pacing the room. "We can't let the media turn him into a hero. They need to see him as a man who doesn't respect the system." The rest of his team looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable with the aggressive strategy. One of the junior associates, Sarah, spoke up hesitantly. "But isn't that what we want, sir? To get the jury and the public thinking that way? If we paint him as an out-of-control, arrogant figure, we could win the jury over." Palmer stopped pacing and turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "Exactly. But we need to show that he's dangerous, not just as a businessman, but as a person who believes that the rules don't apply to him. We have to make it clear that if we allow him to succeed, we're allowing a dangerous precedent to be set. If people think he can just barge into courtrooms, demand respect, and bypass the law, what's next?" It was a powerful argument, one that Palmer knew would resonate with the public and the jury. Musk had made it clear he wasn't afraid of challenging authority, but Palmer planned to make sure that his defiance was seen as a threat, not a virtue. As the trial resumed, the atmosphere was charged with an even greater sense of anticipation. The courtroom was packed, but now the focus was squarely on Musk. His every movement, every word, was being analyzed. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for him to either stumble or rise to new heights. Musk stood up, his hands resting lightly on the table. He looked calm, collected, as though he were in complete control. His demeanor was nothing like the aggressive, combative image the media had painted. Instead, he exuded the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what he wanted, and knowing that nothing would stop him from getting it. "I appreciate the opportunity to speak once more," Musk said, addressing the judge. "But I'd like to remind the court that this case is not just about what's happening here today. It's about what comes next." His voice was steady, but there was an underlying edge, a subtle challenge. He wasn't just answering questions anymore. He was controlling the narrative, forcing the jury and the public to think about the long-term consequences of this trial. He was asking them to look beyond the courtroom and consider the larger implications. "The technology we're talking about here," Musk continued, "is not just a product. It's a revolution. And revolutions don't happen by following the rules. They happen by breaking them, by seeing things differently, and by making bold decisions. History remembers those who took risks, not those who played it safe." His words were powerful, resonating not just with his supporters, but even with those who were skeptical. Musk had always been a man who believed in the power of bold ideas, and here, in this very courtroom, he was showing the world just how far he was willing to go to protect his vision. But Palmer wasn't ready to back down. He stood up, cutting off Musk's speech. "Your Honor," Palmer interjected sharply, "we cannot allow Mr. Musk to manipulate this trial for his own personal agenda. This is not about changing the world or revolutionizing technology. It's about a man who believes that the law doesn't apply to him. He's here today to use his wealth and influence to bend the rules in his favor. If we allow this behavior to continue, we risk setting a dangerous precedent for the future." Musk's eyes locked with Palmer's, and for a moment, it was as if the courtroom itself had fallen silent. The two men were locked in a battle of wills, each trying to outmaneuver the other. Musk was playing a long game, using his charm and his vision to sway the court, while Palmer was doing everything in his power to remind everyone that this was still a legal proceeding, a place where rules mattered. The judge, clearly aware of the growing tensions, called for another brief recess. As the lawyers filed out, the spectators remained seated, absorbed in the drama that was unfolding before them. The media coverage had intensified, and the public was beginning to take sides. The courtroom, once a place of cold logic and legal procedure, had now become a battleground for something much larger: the future of technology, power, and the role of authority in a rapidly changing world. Musk wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for a vision, a world where boundaries were meant to be pushed, and the rules were written by those brave enough to rewrite them. As the trial trudged onward, the tension in the courtroom remained palpable. Every word, every gesture, felt like it had greater significance than anyone could anticipate. Musk, though outwardly calm, was beginning to feel the strain. His legal team had been under constant pressure, not only from the opposing counsel but also from the media and the public, whose attention was glued to every detail of the case. But there was a twist in the air, a development that none had seen coming. It began on a seemingly ordinary afternoon. The courtroom, as usual, was packed with spectators, lawyers, and media members. Musk's team had just presented their defense on the latest set of accusations, arguing that Musk's approach to business was not only legal but visionary. They had been laying the groundwork for the argument that his unconventional methods were essential for pushing humanity forward. Musk's words from earlier, echoing the idea that revolutions didn't happen by playing it safe, had sparked the courtroom into a charged atmosphere, dividing opinions into factions of admiration and resentment. However, just as the trial seemed to settle back into the expected rhythm, an unexpected visitor arrived. A tall, poised woman, dressed in an unassuming black suit, entered the courtroom and walked directly to the judge's bench. Her presence was unmistakable, a silent force that drew everyone's attention. She had an aura about her, a sense of authority, but not in the typical legal manner. It was something more, a quiet power that commanded respect. Her name was Abigail Hayes, a former high-ranking government official who had recently been in the headlines for her controversial departure from the public sector. Known for her strong opinions about technological ethics, her exit from government had been messy, with accusations that she was too idealistic, too willing to challenge the system she once represented. No one had expected her to show up here, least of all in the middle of Musk's trial. Judge Matthews, recognizing her immediately, allowed her to approach. The room buzzed as the unexpected guest made her way to the stand. "Your Honor, if I may?" Abigail began, her voice steady and deliberate, as she turned toward the judge. "I'm here to offer testimony that could change the course of this case. I'm not here as a political figure. I'm here as a citizen who has seen the consequences of failing to understand the forces at play in technology today." Musk's legal team exchanged surprised glances. This was an unusual move, especially given Abigail's background. Yet, it was clear that her reputation preceded her. If she had come to offer her insights, then it could mean something big, something unexpected. Judge Matthews nodded, signaling her to proceed. Abigail turned to face the courtroom, her eyes briefly meeting Musk's before she began. "Elon Musk stands accused of undermining established systems, of circumventing protocols. But the truth is, the very systems that these accusations are based on, those same protocols, are outdated. They were never designed to keep pace with the rapid advancements in technology that we're seeing now. And so, we are left with a paradox. The very systems designed to protect us are now holding us back." A murmur ran through the courtroom as people processed what she was saying. Was this woman actually supporting Musk? Abigail continued, "I know firsthand the struggles of navigating regulatory environments that are ill-equipped to deal with revolutionary technologies. The government, the legal system, they are behind the times. In my career, I've watched countless new technologies get caught in the web of bureaucracy. Some of the brightest minds of our time have been stifled by outdated rules and regulations. Elon Musk is not an anomaly. He's a symptom of a much larger issue." At this, Musk leaned forward in his seat, his attention now fully on Abigail. His team, initially cautious, had now shifted their focus to her as well. What was this woman's game? Abigail's words continued to hit with precision. "Mr. Musk has made bold decisions, yes. He has broken with tradition. But that's exactly what we need. The world isn't waiting for the law to catch up. It's moving forward, and those who can't keep up will be left behind." Palmer stood up, interrupting Abigail mid-sentence. "Your Honor, this testimony is completely irrelevant to the case at hand. Ms. Hayes has no direct knowledge of the events in question and is only here to push her own agenda." Judge Matthews raised a hand, silencing Palmer with a look. "Mr. Palmer, I'll allow her to continue. Let's hear her out." Abigail nodded politely at the judge before continuing. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'm not here to make Mr. Musk a martyr or to suggest that he should be above the law. But what I am suggesting is that the law needs to evolve to meet the reality of what we're facing in this technological age. We can no longer rely on the old models of governance. Innovation requires room to breathe." Palmer's face reddened as he sat back down, clearly irritated but powerless to stop the testimony. Abigail's words hung in the air, their implications far greater than anyone had anticipated. Musk had a way of pushing boundaries and challenging authority, but he had never had such a powerful, high-profile ally in his corner. As Abigail finished speaking, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. What had once been a battle between Musk and Palmer was now something larger, a conflict of ideologies. On one side, you had Musk, the tech mogul, a man who rejected limits in the pursuit of his dreams. On the other, you had those who believed that the established systems, for all their flaws, were the bedrock of society's structure and order. But now, with Abigail's testimony, a new question had emerged. Was the law an ally, or was it the problem? For Musk, this was a pivotal moment. He had been playing the long game, testing the limits of legal boundaries, but now he had someone who was publicly aligning with him, someone who had held significant power in the very systems that he was trying to disrupt. The media, of course, seized on the moment. Headlines spread like wildfire. Elon Musk gains unexpected ally in former government official. The story began to take on a life of its own. For some, Abigail Hayes was a breath of fresh air, a voice of reason in the face of a rigid, archaic system. For others, she was an opportunist, someone who had abandoned her post to throw in her lot with a man whose defiance could jeopardize everything. But for Musk, this unexpected turn of events had given him something he hadn't had in the courtroom so far: momentum. The sudden appearance of Abigail Hayes in the courtroom sent shockwaves through the entire legal world. Musk's unexpected ally had completely changed the dynamics of the trial, shifting the focus from Musk's individual actions to a larger conversation about the state of innovation and technology. For many in the room, this development was as shocking as it was strategic. Musk's legal team, though taken off guard, understood the gravity of the moment. Laura Hightower, his lead attorney, knew that Abigail's testimony could be the turning point they needed. It was as though a fresh breeze had entered the stuffy, stagnant room. Musk was no longer a lone rebel. He now had an intellectual heavyweight on his side, someone who could speak to the larger issue at hand: how outdated systems were trying and failing to govern the future. In the days following Abigail's testimony, the public's perception of the trial took a sharp turn. Headlines, blogs, and social media platforms were abuzz with varying opinions. Some were quick to label her as a champion for innovation, a defender of the future against a system stuck in the past. Others, however, saw her as a dangerous advocate for lawlessness, someone who was actively undermining the very structures meant to ensure safety and accountability. The courtroom itself became more polarized. Supporters of Musk, energized by Abigail's words, rallied behind him. They saw him as a visionary, someone who was pushing humanity toward progress, no matter the cost. On the other hand, Palmer's supporters became more vocal, denouncing what they viewed as a brazen disregard for rules, a reckless disregard for the consequences that could follow if Musk was allowed to operate unchecked. Palmer, ever the strategist, was clearly rattled. The media had shifted its focus. Now, it wasn't just about Musk's legal defense. It was about whether or not society should embrace a future where rules were bent to accommodate the likes of Musk and his grand ideas. Palmer, who had always prided himself on his methodical and detail-oriented approach, now had to adjust to this larger ideological battle. The stakes were higher than they had ever been before. During a particularly tense session in the courtroom, Palmer tried to regain control of the narrative. Standing in front of the judge, he looked out at the sea of faces in the courtroom and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," Palmer began, his voice steady but forceful, "you've heard the testimony of Ms. Hayes, and I understand that her words may sound compelling. After all, it's easy to romanticize the idea of a future unbound by rules and regulations. But let me be clear, this is not about progress. This is about power. It's about one man, Elon Musk, deciding that the rules of this country don't apply to him. It's about one man's ego trying to rewrite the fabric of our society for his benefit and his benefit alone." Palmer's words hung in the air, attempting to paint Musk as a dangerous figure, one who sought to challenge not just the law, but the very structure of democracy. He continued, leaning into the sentiment he had been building all week. "If we allow this to happen," Palmer said, his tone growing more impassioned, "then what happens next? What happens when other powerful individuals, billionaires, tech moguls, and corporate giants, decide that the law doesn't apply to them either? Where does it end? If we allow this kind of behavior to go unchecked, we risk losing everything we've worked so hard to build. The rule of law is not a suggestion. It is the foundation of our society." The jury sat in silence, taking in Palmer's words. Some appeared deep in thought, others visibly tense. Musk's supporters, however, sat back with steely resolve, waiting for their turn to speak. It was then that Musk's voice broke the silence. "Mr. Palmer, with all due respect," Musk began, standing up from his seat. His tone was calm but unwavering. "What you're describing is the status quo. And let me tell you something, the status quo is broken. Our system is antiquated, slow, and it stifles progress. We are not talking about a world where there are no rules. We are talking about a world where the rules adapt to the times, where they support the future, not restrict it. Musk's gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with the jury, the judge, and even Palmer himself. This trial, this entire case, isn't just about me, Musk continued. It's about whether we want to continue living in a world where the people in power are more concerned about protecting their interests than creating a better future. It's about whether we're willing to let fear dictate what we can or cannot do. The law should never be a tool to slow down progress. It should be a force that drives us forward. And that's what I stand for. Not for myself, but for the future of humanity. His words echoed in the courtroom, and for a brief moment, it felt as if the whole room was holding its breath. Musk had always been a master of vision and persuasion, but this was something different. It wasn't just a defense, it was a rallying cry, a challenge to the very system that sought to contain him. Abigail Hayes, seated quietly in the back of the courtroom, looked at Musk with quiet approval. Her involvement in the trial had been about more than just offering testimony. It was about amplifying Musk's voice, ensuring that his message reached the ears of those who mattered. She had known that Musk's perspective on the law, on progress, was something that resonated with people in a way few could comprehend. But it wasn't just about selling an idea. It was about changing minds, forcing a conversation that was long overdue. As the session concluded and the courtroom began to clear, it was clear that the trial had entered a new phase. Palmer's rhetoric, while still powerful, was starting to lose its grip. The jury, the media, and even the public at large were beginning to see the deeper implications of Musk's words. This wasn't just a trial about legal violations. It was about what kind of world people wanted to live in. Would they continue clinging to outdated systems, or would they embrace a future where innovation could thrive, unchecked by the traditional boundaries of law and convention? The divide between those who supported Musk and those who stood against him was widening by the day. But no matter how the trial ended, one thing was certain. This battle was far from over. The lines had been drawn, and the stakes had never been higher. The question remained, could Musk and his vision survive the onslaught, or would the system, like it always had before, crush him under the weight of its own rules? The trial had reached a fever pitch, and the weight of the moment seemed to hang over everyone in the courtroom. What had started as a legal battle over Musk's business practices had evolved into a full-scale ideological war, one where each side represented a larger vision for the future of technology, governance, and progress. Musk's words, backed by Abigail Hayes' testimony, had shaken the courtroom, but they had also intensified the stakes. For Musk, it was no longer just about defending his company. It was about proving that his vision for the future, one where technological advancements pushed humanity forward, was the right path, no matter the cost. But Palmer, the opposing counsel, wasn't backing down. If anything, he was more determined than ever to take Musk down. The next day in court, Palmer came out swinging. He was no longer merely focused on presenting facts or refuting arguments. He had come to fight with everything he had. As he stood before the jury, his tone was sharp, calculated, and relentless. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Palmer began, his voice cutting through the tension in the room, "what Mr. Musk and his supporters want you to believe is that we're on the brink of something incredible, something revolutionary. And yes, there's no doubt that technology has the potential to change the world. But what Mr. Musk fails to acknowledge is that his disregard for the very systems that keep society stable can't be swept under the rug." Palmer paused for effect, scanning the jury as he continued. "He's asking you to believe that progress comes at the expense of accountability, that the law, the rules we've spent generations building to ensure fairness and justice, should be bent or broken for the sake of innovation. What Musk doesn't seem to understand, or perhaps what he doesn't care about, is that unchecked power is dangerous. History has shown us time and time again what happens when one man's vision becomes more important than the collective good." Musk's team stiffened in their seats, aware of Palmer's ability to manipulate the narrative with skillful rhetoric. But Musk remained calm, his gaze focused on Palmer as if watching a chess game unfold. He knew what Palmer was trying to do: paint him as a villain, a man who cared only for his own interests at the expense of everyone else. Palmer continued, pushing harder. "If we let someone like Musk get away with this, what's next? Do we let him bypass environmental regulations because his companies are saving the planet? Do we ignore workplace safety laws because he's creating jobs? Do we let him dictate the future without any regard for the rest of society? That's not progress. That's chaos. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Palmer's words settled in the air. The jury looked conflicted, many of them nodding along as Palmer made his case. Musk's supporters, however, seemed to be growing increasingly uneasy. The argument that Palmer was presenting was persuasive to many who were still unsure about Musk's true motivations. Then, as if on cue, Musk stood up, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Palmer's fiery rhetoric. The room went silent as he took a step forward and addressed the court directly. "Mr. Palmer, with all due respect," Musk began, his voice even but unwavering, "you speak about power and responsibility, but you fail to recognize the responsibility of leadership. The truth is, the systems we have in place were not designed to handle the rapid pace of innovation. They weren't built for the challenges we face today. And instead of trying to mold technology to fit into an outdated framework, we should be focused on evolving the system itself." Musk's words hit harder than anyone had anticipated. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a statement of purpose, a rallying cry for those who believed that progress and innovation should be the driving forces of society. "We are at a crossroads," Musk continued, his voice growing in intensity. "And while the rules of the past have served us, they cannot stand in the way of the future. I'm not asking for laws to be ignored. I'm asking for a system that adapts, one that fosters growth and creativity rather than stifling it." There was a brief moment of silence as the gravity of Musk's statement sank in. It was clear that Musk was no longer playing defense. He was taking the fight to Palmer, presenting his vision for the future and daring anyone to challenge it. Judge Matthews, who had been observing the exchange closely, cleared his throat, signaling a break in the proceedings. The courtroom buzzed as people whispered to each other, processing the stark divide between the two sides. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy continued to escalate. Every network, every platform, had picked up on the intensity of the trial. The story had moved beyond the legal proceedings. It had become a cultural moment, a defining battle between the old guard and the visionaries who were reshaping the world. The contrast between Musk's supporters and his detractors had never been clearer. Those who admired Musk saw him as a pioneer, someone willing to take risks in the pursuit of a better tomorrow. His critics, on the other hand, saw him as a reckless idealist, someone who believed the rules didn't apply to him. Both sides were passionately entrenched in their beliefs, and the trial was now a battleground for the future of technology, business, and law. As the court recessed for the day, Musk's legal team huddled in their strategy room, their minds racing with the implications of what had just transpired. "We need to capitalize on this," Laura Hightower said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Musk's message has resonated with the public, and we can use that to our advantage. The jury is already divided, but if we keep pushing the narrative of innovation versus stagnation, we can shift the momentum in our favor." Musk nodded in agreement, his focus unwavering. "We've got one shot at this. Let's make sure we're ready for tomorrow." The trial, it seemed, had entered its most critical phase. The ideological divide between Musk and Palmer had never been clearer, and the outcome of this battle would shape the future, for better or for worse. Each side now had its champions, and each had a compelling vision for the world to come. But as the courtroom emptied, one question remained. Who would the jury believe? Musk had made his case, but Palmer, ever the strategist, wasn't about to give up just yet. The next round of the battle was fast approaching, and both sides knew that this was a war that could change everything. The courtroom had become a battleground, with every word exchanged carrying the weight of history. What was once a straightforward legal case had now evolved into something much larger. It was no longer just about Musk's actions. It was about a fundamental question. Should the world's rules adapt to meet the pace of innovation, or should innovation itself be bound by tradition? As the trial moved into its second week, the pressure on both sides reached a boiling point. The media circus surrounding the case intensified, and every moment seemed to carry far-reaching consequences. Musk's supporters were watching intently, cheering for every moment of clarity that the billionaire delivered. Meanwhile, Palmer's camp was equally determined, reinforcing their belief that unchecked innovation could spell disaster for society. But on the morning of the pivotal cross-examination, everything changed. Musk's team had prepared for the day meticulously, knowing it would be the moment that could tip the balance of the trial. Laura Hightower had carefully crafted a strategy to dismantle Palmer's arguments and solidify Musk's position as a visionary rather than a rogue businessman. Palmer's strategy was simple: undermine Musk's credibility. If he could plant doubt about Musk's true motivations, casting him not as a force for progress but as a self-serving mogul who cared little for the consequences, it could shift the tide in Palmer's favor. The cross-examination began with Palmer's signature calm, calculated tone. He walked slowly around the witness stand, his eyes never leaving Musk's face. "Mr. Musk," Palmer began, his voice cool, "you've made it abundantly clear in your testimony that you believe the traditional systems of governance are outdated and need to be reformed. But isn't it true that your companies, such as Tesla and SpaceX, benefit greatly from government contracts, subsidies, and tax incentives?" Musk didn't flinch. "Yes, those programs exist to support innovation, and I've utilized them to drive advancements in energy and space exploration. But that doesn't mean the entire system is flawless. I've always believed that these systems can evolve to better support new industries." Palmer smiled thinly, sensing an opening. "So, you're willing to take advantage of the very systems you claim are outdated when it suits your needs, but when it comes to your own operations, you believe those same systems should be bypassed? Doesn't that seem hypocritical, Mr. Musk?" Musk's face remained impassive as he responded. "It's not about bypassing the system. It's about pushing the system to evolve, to meet the needs of today's challenges. Innovation doesn't wait for bureaucracy to catch up, it forces the issue." Palmer pressed on, trying to push Musk into a corner. "But isn't it true that by pushing the system too far, you risk undermining the very foundation of democracy? If you're allowed to circumvent the rules, then anyone, any company, can do the same, with no accountability to the people." Musk met Palmer's gaze, his voice unwavering. "Innovation is about solving problems. It's not about playing by outdated rules that were made for a different time. If we allow the fear of the unknown to stop progress, we'll be left behind." The jury was watching closely, and it was clear that Musk's words were having an impact. Palmer had hoped to paint him as a man driven by self-interest, but instead, Musk's words resonated as a call for a future that could not be delayed by bureaucracy. It was a call to action. Palmer, realizing he wasn't making the headway he needed, shifted tactics. "And what about the people who have been hurt by your company's rapid rise?" he asked. "What about the workers who have been exposed to dangerous conditions, the environmental concerns raised about your factories, or the concerns about the safety of your self-driving cars? Do these people not deserve the same consideration as your grand vision for the future?" Musk hesitated for a brief moment, the tension in the room palpable. Then he spoke, his voice steady but with a hint of emotion. "I take responsibility for any shortcomings in our operations. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'm committed to improving safety and environmental practices. But we are not going to stop because of fear. We are working every day to make the future safer, cleaner, and more sustainable. That's why we do what we do." For a moment, there was a silence in the courtroom. It was a rare admission from Musk, but it wasn't an apology. It was a commitment. A promise that his companies would always strive to be better, to learn from their mistakes, and to continue pushing forward. Palmer was caught off guard, unsure how to respond. The force of Musk's words had momentarily deflated his attack, leaving him struggling to regain his footing. Musk had effectively reframed the conversation. It was no longer about mistakes made in the past. It was about a larger vision for the future. As the day wore on, it became clear that Musk's defense had shifted the momentum. The ideological divide was now more pronounced than ever, with Musk's words stirring the hearts of many in the courtroom. His supporters, who had been silent observers up until this point, began to speak out in the corridors, voicing their approval of Musk's steadfast stance. They believed in his vision, not just as a businessman, but as someone who was fighting for the future of humanity. Outside the courtroom, the media storm intensified. Social media platforms buzzed with mixed reactions to the day's events. Headlines screamed with one side, accusing Musk of recklessness, and the other hailing him as a hero for progress. The court of public opinion was just as important as the one inside the courtroom, and Musk's narrative was gaining ground. As the trial broke for the evening, Musk found himself alone in his thoughts. He was used to pressure, but this felt different. This was no longer just about winning a case. It was about changing the conversation about innovation, technology, and the future. He knew that the next few days would be crucial. Palmer would undoubtedly continue to fight back, but Musk's resolve had never been stronger. He had already taken the first step toward changing the world, and nothing, least of all Palmer, was going to stop him. That night, as Musk lay in bed, he reflected on the many battles he had fought throughout his life. From the early days of PayPal to the challenges of building Tesla and SpaceX, he had always been on the edge of change, pushing boundaries and defying expectations. This trial was no different. It was just another step in the long journey toward a better, more advanced world. As he closed his eyes, he felt a sense of calm. Tomorrow was another day, another opportunity to fight for the future. And he was ready. The morning sun streamed through the courtroom windows, casting long shadows on the wooden floors. It was the final day of the trial, and the air in the room was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew this was it, the climax of a battle that had captured the attention of the world. For Elon Musk, this was more than just a legal dispute. It was the culmination of years of relentless ambition, the quest to reshape humanity's future. For Palmer, it was the chance to put a stop to Musk's vision, to prove that the unchecked power of innovation could not be allowed to stand. Musk sat at the defense table, his eyes focused but his mind racing. He knew Palmer would bring everything he had in these final moments. Palmer wasn't just going to play defense. He would attack with a fury that Musk hadn't yet seen. This was the last stand, the moment that would determine everything. Palmer, as always, was calm and collected. He walked into the courtroom, exuding an air of confidence that made the room seem smaller, more claustrophobic. As he took his seat, he exchanged a glance with his team. They had worked tirelessly to prepare for this day, and Palmer knew it was all about to come to a head. The judge, a seasoned and no-nonsense figure, called the room to order. The jury sat on the edge of their seats, their expressions unreadable, as the final phase of the trial began. Musk's team had delivered a solid defense, but Palmer wasn't ready to give up just yet. He had one final card to play, and he was going to play it with all the force he could muster. "I'd like to make a closing argument," Palmer began, his voice ringing out with authority. He stood tall, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom, making eye contact with the jury as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Palmer said, "Elon Musk has convinced you that he is a visionary, a man of unparalleled brilliance, someone who is destined to lead us into the future. But let me ask you this. What kind of future does he envision? Is it one where innovation runs rampant, unchecked by any laws or regulations? A future where the individual can do whatever they want, regardless of the consequences for society? A future where a man can play God, creating and destroying at will, all in the name of progress?" Palmer's voice rose with each word, his words becoming more impassioned, more forceful. "Musk's companies may have achieved great things, but at what cost? Workers have been exploited. Environmental concerns have been swept aside, and people have been hurt, all for the sake of his grand vision. Musk would have you believe that this is the price of progress, but I ask you to think about it. Is this really the kind of world we want to live in? A world where power and greed rule, and where those in charge are never held accountable?" Palmer paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He could feel the tension in the room, the jury hanging on every syllable. It was working. He could see it in their faces. His argument was hitting home. Musk's grand vision was being framed as dangerous, reckless, and selfish. He turned to face Musk, who was sitting motionless at the defense table. "Mr. Musk," Palmer said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you've made a career out of flaunting the rules. You've built your empire by cutting corners, exploiting the system, and ignoring the law when it suits you. And now you stand here, asking us to believe that you're a hero. But the truth is, you're no different from the very forces you claim to fight against. You are a man who will stop at nothing to achieve his goals. no matter who or what gets trampled along the way. The courtroom was silent. The jury was clearly conflicted. Some faces showed signs of doubt, others of skepticism. Palmer had planted the seed of uncertainty, and for a moment, Musk's vision seemed less clear, less noble. The weight of Palmer's argument hung heavily in the air. But then, Musk stood up. The room fell into a hushed silence as he took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. His face was calm, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. He was ready for this final moment. It was time to counter everything Palmer had said, and to make the case for the future he had always believed in. "Mr. Palmer," Musk began, his voice steady and measured, "I understand your concerns. I understand that what I do, what I believe in, can be unsettling. But the world doesn't move forward by playing it safe. The world changes because people dare to push the boundaries. They dare to challenge the status quo. That's what I've always tried to do. Not to break the law, but to bend it in ways that allow us to achieve the impossible." Musk paused for a moment, looking directly at the jury. "I've never claimed to be perfect. I've never said that my companies are without fault. But I've always tried to do what's right, for the planet, for the future, for the people who believe in what we're trying to accomplish. And yes, there have been mistakes along the way. There will always be mistakes. But the difference is this: we learn from them, we improve, and we keep going." His voice grew more impassioned as he spoke. "We are on the brink of something that can change the world. We are working toward a future where humanity can become a multiplanetary species, where clean energy is the norm, where our children inherit a better world than we did. Is that not worth fighting for? Is that not worth the risk?" Musk's eyes scanned the courtroom, his gaze unwavering. "I don't claim to have all the answers, but I do claim this. If we don't embrace innovation, if we don't take risks, then we're doomed to live in a world that stagnates. A world that never grows, never advances. And that's not a future I'm willing to accept." The courtroom remained silent for a moment. Musk had laid out his vision with all the conviction he had. There was no doubt in his words, no hesitation. He was fighting for a future he believed in, a future that might be messy and imperfect, but one that was filled with possibility. Palmer, on the other hand, looked almost exhausted. The intensity of Musk's words had cut through the courtroom like a blade. The jury was silent, but Musk could see the shift in their expressions. He had made his case. It was now up to them. As the judge called for a recess before closing statements, Musk sat back in his chair, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. The final argument had been made. Now, all he could do was wait. Outside the courtroom, the media had already begun speculating about the outcome. The world was watching. Would they believe in Musk's vision for the future? Or would Palmer's warnings about unchecked power win the day? The clock was ticking, and the fate of Musk's legacy was hanging in the balance. The courthouse had become a battleground of opinions, each side fighting for the future they believed in. After the intense back and forth, the trial had come to its final moments. The jury had deliberated for what felt like hours, the weight of their decision pressing down on their shoulders. Outside the courtroom, the world watched with bated breath. The question on everyone's mind: what would the jury decide? Elon Musk sat in his chair, his hands clenched in front of him. His mind raced through every detail of the trial, the tough moments, the arguments, the moments of doubt. But through it all, one thing had remained constant: his belief in the future he was fighting for. Even as the trial reached its conclusion, Musk knew that this was just one chapter in a much larger story. The jury had been locked away for hours, carefully considering all the evidence presented. There was a palpable tension in the room as the judge made her way to the bench. The sound of her gavel echoing throughout the courtroom marked the end of the waiting game. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the judge began, her voice stern but calm. "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with short, graying hair, stood up. The room fell into complete silence as every eye turned toward her. Her expression was unreadable, giving nothing away. She held the envelope containing the verdict in her hands. The foreperson cleared her throat before speaking, her voice steady but heavy with significance. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty on all charges." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. A wave of murmurs swept across the room, and Musk's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, he felt frozen. The weight of the verdict, the culmination of everything he had fought for, hit him all at once. There was no immediate celebration, no cheering. The courtroom was filled with a profound sense of disbelief, as the tension from the trial dissipated into something else. Relief, perhaps, or maybe confusion. Musk's team exchanged quick glances, but it was clear that no one had expected it to be this clean-cut. Palmer, for all his calculated arguments and aggressive tactics, looked stunned. His jaw tightened as he leaned forward, eyes narrowing, as though he couldn't comprehend the outcome. He had been so sure that he could defeat Musk, expose his vision as reckless and dangerous. But now, in the face of this overwhelming decision, he seemed lost for words. Musk, on the other hand, felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief, yes, but also a deep sense of exhaustion. The trial had drained him. He had been in the public eye for so long, fighting battles on multiple fronts: business, innovation, and now the courtroom. This moment was a victory, but it felt different from the others. It was no longer about proving his worth. It was about vindication. "I thank the jury for their time and their careful deliberation," Musk said, standing up slowly. His voice, though steady, betrayed the intensity of the moment. "I believe that this decision is not just a victory for me, but for innovation and the future we all share. But this is just the beginning. There is still so much more to do." The judge nodded, giving Musk a brief but understanding look before addressing the room. "The defendant is free to go," she said, before signaling for the courtroom to be dismissed. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, Musk's team exhaled collectively. The pressure that had mounted over the past several weeks was finally over. But it wasn't just Musk's legal team that was celebrating. The media, the public, everyone had been watching, waiting for the verdict. And now that the dust had settled, it was clear that Musk had won. Outside, reporters flooded the steps of the courthouse, cameras flashing and microphones thrusting forward. Musk walked out slowly, flanked by his legal team, as questions shouted at him from all sides. "Elon, how do you feel about the verdict? Elon, what's next for you and your companies? Do you think this will change the way people view you?" Musk paused for a moment, looking at the reporters with a calm but resolute expression. Then, he spoke. "This is not just about me," he said, his voice carrying through the crowd. "It's about the future of technology, innovation, and progress. Today, we take another step forward." As he made his way to the waiting car, Musk couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The trial had been an ordeal, no doubt, but it had also strengthened his resolve. He was more determined than ever to push the boundaries of what was possible. Later that night, as Musk sat in his private office, he reflected on everything that had led him to this moment. The long nights building Tesla, the struggles with SpaceX, the criticisms, the triumphs, and now, the courtroom drama. He had been tested in ways he hadn't anticipated, but it had reaffirmed something deep inside him. His vision for the future was just beginning, and no court, no adversary, would ever stop him. But Musk also knew that this victory came with its own set of challenges. The world was watching. The media had already begun to spin their own narratives, some calling it a triumph for progress, others questioning the implications of his unchecked power. But Musk had never been one to shy away from scrutiny. If anything, it only fueled his desire to keep pushing forward. The days following the trial were a whirlwind of media attention, public praise, and of course, new challenges. Musk had walked out of the courthouse victorious, but he knew that the battle wasn't really over. The verdict, while a personal triumph, was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. The future of humanity, as he envisioned it, still hung in the balance. It was early morning when Musk arrived at the Tesla headquarters in Palo Alto. The campus was buzzing with activity, as always. Employees rushed past him, heads down, focused on the day ahead. But today was different. There was an energy in the air, an electric sense of possibility that even Musk could feel. As he stepped into the building, he was greeted by his team. They had all gathered in the large conference room, where a presentation was set up. The moment Musk entered, the room fell silent. He could feel the weight of their expectations. They were all looking to him for direction, for what came next. "All right, everyone," Musk began, walking to the front of the room. "I know you've all been following the trial. The verdict is behind us now, but the real work starts today. We have big plans, plans that will push us further than we've ever gone before. The future of Tesla, of humanity, is in our hands." He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. His gaze moved across the faces in the room, each one reflecting a different part of the journey they had all shared. The highs, the lows, the struggles, and the breakthroughs. But Musk wasn't one to dwell on the past. He had always been focused on what came next. "First," he continued, "we're doubling down on our efforts to accelerate sustainable energy. The mission hasn't changed. The world is depending on us to make a real difference. We'll continue to innovate, to push the envelope, and to do what others think is impossible." A few nods from the team, but Musk wasn't finished. He could feel the hunger in their eyes. They were ready, but it was time to raise the stakes. "Second," he said, his voice growing more intense, "we're going to space. And not just with SpaceX. We're talking about colonizing Mars. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Humanity must become a multi-planetary species. We can't afford to put all our eggs in one basket. We need to ensure our survival by expanding beyond Earth. This is the next frontier, and we're not going to wait around for others to catch up. We're going to lead the way." There it was, the bold declaration that would define the next phase of his life and the future of his companies. Musk wasn't just aiming to be a billionaire. He was aiming to change the trajectory of humanity itself. For him, the stakes were far greater than just business. The room erupted in applause. His team knew what this meant. They were about to embark on the most audacious journey of their careers. But even as the team celebrated, Musk's mind was already racing ahead. There were challenges to face, both internal and external. Governments, regulations, competitors, and even public opinion. There were many obstacles standing in his way. But Musk was used to obstacles. In fact, he thrived on them. Later that day, Musk found himself at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The mood there was one of controlled chaos. Engineers, scientists, and astronauts were all deep in discussions, working on the next big leap. The Starship project? This was the spacecraft designed to take humanity to Mars and beyond, and Musk believed it would change everything. As he walked through the facility, he was met with smiles and greetings from the team. The project was progressing, but it was clear there was still much to be done. Musk could see the excitement in the air, but he could also sense the tension. They were up against the clock. Time was running out, and the pressure to succeed had never been greater. In a private meeting with his lead engineers, Musk laid out his vision for the next phase of the mission. "We're not just building a rocket," he told them. "We're building a future for humanity. This isn't about making money or being famous. This is about survival. If we don't get to Mars soon, we risk losing the chance forever." He paused, looking each of them in the eye. "I know it's going to be difficult. I know there will be setbacks. But we can't stop. We won't stop. Because the stakes are too high." The room was silent for a moment. Then, one of the engineers, Samantha, a brilliant aerospace designer, spoke up. "Elon, we're with you. We all believe in this mission. We know what's at stake. Let's make it happen." Musk gave a small nod, feeling a surge of gratitude. For all the challenges he faced, for all the people who doubted him, moments like this reminded him why he pushed so hard. The future wasn't built on ease or comfort. It was built on risk, on hard work, and on a relentless drive to do the impossible. As he left the SpaceX facility later that day, Musk couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was on the horizon. The road ahead was uncertain, but he had never been one to shy away from uncertainty. He embraced it. It was where the greatest breakthroughs happened. And so, with the trial behind him and his vision clearer than ever, Elon Musk set his sights on the stars. But he knew that the journey wouldn't be easy. There would be hurdles, internal and external, every step of the way. But he was ready. In fact, he had never been more ready. Musk looked up at the sky as he walked to his car, a sense of quiet determination settling over him. The future, he knew, was waiting. It was just a matter of getting there. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? In the weeks following the verdict, Elon Musk threw himself deeper into his work. The noise and spectacle of the trial were fading, but his mission to reshape humanity's future had only grown more urgent. With Tesla accelerating towards new heights of innovation and SpaceX pushing the boundaries of space exploration, Musk was determined to make his mark on history in a way few could ever imagine. The concept of colonizing Mars had always been Musk's ultimate goal, but now, with a clear path forward, he was ready to take the next steps that would challenge not only his own company but the world itself. The SpaceX team was deep in development on Starship, a fully reusable spacecraft designed to carry humans to Mars and beyond. It was the culmination of years of work, and Musk knew that this project was the key to unlocking the future. But as always, there were obstacles to overcome. Late one night, Musk sat at his desk in SpaceX headquarters, reviewing data from the latest round of tests on Starship. The numbers were promising, but there was still a long way to go. SpaceX had made incredible progress with the Falcon rockets, but Starship was a whole different beast, larger, more complex, and far more risky. Musk ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of the challenge. The world's eyes were on him. If SpaceX succeeded in sending humans to Mars, it would be a monumental achievement. But if they failed, it could be disastrous, not just for SpaceX, but for Musk's entire vision of the future. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Elon, we've got the team from NASA on the line," his assistant, Kelly, said. "They want to discuss the next phase of our collaboration." Musk nodded, his mind already shifting gears. NASA had always been an important partner for SpaceX, and their collaboration could help accelerate the timeline for sending astronauts to Mars. But it wasn't without its challenges. The U.S. government, like most governments around the world, was filled with bureaucratic red tape, which Musk had little patience for. He picked up the phone, ready for the conversation ahead. "Hey, this is Elon," he said, his voice calm but focused. "Hi, Elon," came the voice of Dr. Laura Wells, a senior NASA official. "We've been following your progress with Starship, and we're excited about the potential of collaborating on Mars missions. But there are some concerns from our side about the timeline. We need to ensure that everything is in place before we send humans to Mars. The risks are enormous." Musk leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. He had heard similar concerns before, especially from those who didn't fully understand the scale of what he was trying to do. "I understand the risks," he replied, his voice steady but firm. "But if we don't take risks, we'll never get anywhere. The longer we wait, the more we lose. We're already behind. SpaceX is ready to move forward. We don't need permission, we need action." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Musk could almost hear Dr. Wells weighing her response. She was a professional, pragmatic, and cautious, which was exactly why he was so adamant about pushing forward. "Elon, we need to ensure that we have the proper systems in place before we send people to Mars," Dr. Wells said. "We're talking about lives here. There's no room for error." Musk sighed. "I get it, Laura. I know the risks. But I'm telling you, we have the technology. We're ready to take this next step. We can't let fear hold us back." The conversation continued, with both sides discussing the practicalities of a Mars mission, the technology, and the timelines. But Musk's mind was already a few steps ahead. NASA's cautious approach was understandable, but Musk knew that waiting for the perfect conditions would only delay progress. The truth was that the only way to make progress was by taking action, even when the risks were high. As the call ended, Musk stared at the wall in front of him, lost in thought. The path to Mars would never be easy. There would always be those who doubted, who wanted to slow things down, who were too afraid to push the boundaries. But Musk had always been different. He wasn't afraid of failure. In fact, he welcomed it. Failure meant learning, adapting, and ultimately, succeeding. He knew that the timeline to Mars was ambitious, some might even say impossible, but for Musk, the impossible was just the starting point. SpaceX would continue to push forward, no matter the obstacles, because he knew that humanity's future depended on it. Later that evening, Musk sat in his private office, overlooking the SpaceX facilities below. The sprawling campus was alive with activity, engineers and designers working late into the night, their minds focused on the mission at hand. Musk admired their determination. They shared his vision, his drive, his obsession with what was to come. And together, they would break the boundaries of space. As the night stretched on, Musk felt a sense of clarity wash over him. There would be no slowing down, no backing away from this goal. The future of humanity was waiting, and it was up to him to ensure that it arrived. But as he stared out into the darkness, his phone buzzed on his desk. He picked it up, his curiosity piqued. It was a message from his assistant, Kelly. "Your lawyers want to meet with you first thing tomorrow. They've got some updates about the trial." Musk frowned. The trial was over, but there was still some lingering uncertainty. He had put it behind him, but the ripple effects were still being felt. As he read the message, he couldn't help but wonder what the next phase of his journey would entail. The battle in the courtroom might be over, but the battle for the future had just begun. He stood up from his desk, heading for the door. There was still work to be done, plans to be made, missions to execute, and a future to build. And Musk, as always, was ready to lead the charge into the unknown. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, presentations, and strategic discussions. Elon Musk was used to working under pressure, but the weight of what he was attempting to accomplish seemed to compound with every passing day. SpaceX was at the forefront of space exploration, Tesla was revolutionizing the auto industry, and his other ventures, such as Neuralink and the Boring Company, were still very much in play. Each project had its own set of challenges, but all were intricately tied together by one simple idea: the future of humanity. Yet, despite his relentless drive, Musk could not shake a growing unease. The trials, the media scrutiny, and the endless pressure were taking their toll. There was always something new to worry about, a new problem to solve, and no matter how many times he triumphed, the next challenge was always lurking around the corner. It was a constant race, one where the stakes were unimaginably high, and failure wasn't an option. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, even for a moment. One morning, Musk was walking through the SpaceX testing facility in Hawthorne, California. The atmosphere was electric with activity. Teams of engineers and technicians working furiously, ensuring every component of Starship was up to standard. Despite the frenetic pace, Musk couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the back of his mind that things were far from certain. Today, however, something felt different. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his lawyer, Bob. "We need to talk. Urgent. Meeting at 1 p.m. Musk's heart skipped a beat. He had hoped that the legal challenges were behind him after the trial, but the message felt ominous. He knew better than anyone that just because one battle was won didn't mean the war was over. There would always be another twist, another turn. After all, that was the nature of his life. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Musk moved from one meeting to the next, giving instructions to his teams while keeping a close eye on Starship's progress. He couldn't afford to lose focus on his grand vision. But as the hours ticked by, his mind kept drifting back to the looming meeting. What now? What else could go wrong? By 1 p.m., Musk was sitting in a conference room at SpaceX, his usual calm demeanor replaced with an uncharacteristic edge. Bob, his attorney, entered the room, looking more serious than Musk had ever seen him. "Elon," Bob began, settling into a chair across from him, "I've got bad news. It's about the lawsuit." Musk's stomach tightened. "What is it?" Bob hesitated for a moment before continuing. "There's been a new development. Another lawsuit. This time, it's not just about your tweets or the trial. It's about some claims surrounding the management of SpaceX stock and its financial practices. The SEC is involved, and we've been served with a subpoena." Musk leaned back in his chair, trying to process the information. "The SEC? For what?" Bob sighed. "It's complicated, but essentially, there are allegations that SpaceX has been misreporting its stock valuations. The claim is that investors were misled about the company's growth and financial projections. And with your history, Elon, you know this is the kind of thing the SEC takes very seriously." Musk rubbed his eyes, exhaustion settling in. Another legal battle? Another distraction from the work that truly mattered? It felt like the universe was conspiring against him. "This is going to delay everything, isn't it?" Musk asked, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. Possibly, Bob replied. We'll do everything we can to mitigate the damage, but this could be a long process. You know how these things work. We'll need to gather evidence, make our case, and that's going to take time. Time you don't have, especially with Starship and everything else on your plate. Musk sat in silence for a moment, processing the weight of the situation. The path to Mars, the very mission that could change the course of human history, now seemed more uncertain than ever. He could feel the walls closing in, and yet, he knew one thing. Giving up was never an option. I don't have time for this, Musk muttered. We'll handle it, like we always do. But I'm not letting this distract me. SpaceX is going to Mars, and Tesla is going to lead the way on sustainable energy. These things are bigger than any legal battle. Bob nodded, understanding the determination in Musk's eyes. Of course, but I need you to be prepared. There's going to be a lot of noise, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'm used to noise, Musk said, his tone resolute. It's the price of doing something big. With that, the meeting concluded, and Musk found himself walking back to his office, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. There was no time to dwell on the legal mess. The clock was ticking, and humanity's future was waiting. As he sat down at his desk, Musk stared at a picture on his wall. It was a rendering of SpaceX's Starship as it soared through the stars, carrying the first humans to Mars. The image was a symbol of everything he believed in: the audacity of the goal, the scale of the dream, and the relentless drive required to make it a reality. He stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the clear blue sky. There was a sense of clarity in that moment. The obstacles were real, and the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but none of that mattered. He had come this far by ignoring the doubters and pushing forward, even when the odds were stacked against him. The mission was still the same. He would continue to push the boundaries of what was possible. He would send humanity to Mars. He would accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. He would change the world. No lawsuit, no legal battle, and no obstacle would stop him. And as for the future, well, that was something Musk would continue to shape with every decision, every innovation, and every risk he took. The road ahead was uncertain, but that was part of the adventure. He thrived in the unknown, and it was there, in the vast expanse of space, where the future would be written. The weeks that followed the announcement of the SEC subpoena were a whirlwind of activity, both within Musk's companies and in the media. The lawsuit might have been a distraction, but it wasn't enough to derail his larger plans. Musk was resolute. SpaceX was making incredible progress with Starship, and Tesla was on track to revolutionize the automotive and energy industries. He had never been a man to let the small things get in the way of his grand vision, and this was no exception. Still, there was no escaping the fact that the legal challenges were starting to wear on him. He had made billions, shattered records, and revolutionized industries, but as the stakes got higher, the scrutiny only intensified. It was a constant battle on multiple fronts, and the burden was beginning to show in his appearance. The dark circles under his eyes were hard to ignore, but Musk pushed through, determined not to let the pressures of the moment get the better of him. One particular day in the fall, he stood on the test range at SpaceX's launch site in Boca Chica, Texas. The sound of engineers working and the hum of machinery filled the air, but Musk's mind wasn't focused on the technicalities of the latest Starship test. Instead, he was thinking about what was next. What lay on the horizon once Starship finally succeeded in reaching orbit. Musk had always been a man of ambition, and even now, as SpaceX was on the verge of sending its first human crew to space, he had his sights set on the stars. The Starship was poised to carry humanity to Mars, but Musk's vision extended far beyond that. He wasn't just thinking about getting to Mars. He was thinking about building a self-sustaining city on the Red Planet, one that could support life and one day serve as a launchpad for humanity's further expansion into the cosmos. The magnitude of that vision was staggering, but Musk wasn't deterred. He knew that nothing worth doing would ever be easy. "You all right, Elon?" A voice snapped him back to reality. He turned to find Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX, standing next to him. She gave him a knowing look, having seen the weight of the world on his shoulders more than once. Musk nodded, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about the next step?" Gwynne raised an eyebrow. You mean the next 20 steps, right? He chuckled, appreciating her directness. Yeah. The thing is, Gwyn, we're so close to the next big breakthrough, the next level, but it feels like there's always something holding us back. I know the feeling, she said, her voice sympathetic. But we're close. Very close. Musk took a deep breath. He had always been the optimist, pushing forward relentlessly, but lately, the weight of the trials, both legal and personal, had been dragging on him more than he was willing to admit. He wasn't the type of person to show weakness, but Gwyn knew him well enough to sense his struggle. Everything has to go perfectly. No mistakes, he said. If we fail now, we're not just failing ourselves. We're failing humanity's future. She gave him a firm look. We've been through worse, Elon. We've launched rockets that exploded on the pad. We've had projects fall behind schedule. But we keep going, because we know the end result is worth it. So stop worrying about the stuff that doesn't matter. Focus on what you can control. Musk nodded, her words grounding him. He knew she was right. He had faced countless challenges in his career, and yet he had always emerged stronger on the other side. The road to Mars wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever was. The conversation shifted back to the technical aspects of the upcoming launch. Musk's mind wandered momentarily as he thought about how far they had come. SpaceX had made history with the Falcon rockets, proving that reusable spacecraft were possible, but the stakes were higher now. Starship would be the game changer. It would be the key to reaching Mars, the key to humanity's future. Later that day, Musk took a walk through the SpaceX campus, trying to clear his head. It was a warm Texas afternoon, and the air was thick with the smell of rocket fuel and the buzz of construction. Engineers and technicians were working tirelessly, preparing for the next series of tests. Musk marveled at their determination, at the way they continued to push forward, undeterred by the obstacles in their path. It reminded him of the first days of SpaceX, when everything seemed impossible. Back then, people laughed at him. They called him crazy for thinking that a private company could launch rockets and send people into space. Yet here he was, on the verge of sending humans to Mars. The world had come a long way, and Musk had played a significant role in shaping that future. But the pressure was mounting. With every successful test and every new breakthrough, the stakes grew higher. There was no turning back now. The world was watching, and Musk knew that the next few years would define the future of humanity. As Musk walked past a group of engineers huddled around a computer screen, he heard a familiar voice calling his name. Elon, we've got something you need to see, one of the engineers said, gesturing for him to come over. Curious, Musk approached the team. They had been testing the new Starship prototype, and the data they were reviewing was crucial. The engineers showed him the results from the latest series of simulations. We think we've cracked it, one of them said, excitement in his voice. The new heat shield design worked perfectly in our latest tests. It can withstand the extreme temperatures during re-entry, which means we're ready for the next phase. Musk felt a surge of excitement rush through him. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The heat shield was one of the most critical components for the success of Starship. If it worked as expected, they would be one step closer to launching the spacecraft on its first crewed mission to Mars. This is huge, Musk said, his voice full of energy. Let's get this ready for the next test flight. We're not stopping now. As the engineers celebrated, Musk stood back for a moment, letting the weight of the moment settle in. SpaceX had come a long way, and now they were on the verge of something truly historic. But as always, there was more work to be done, more challenges to face, and Musk would stop at nothing to make sure they succeeded. The final countdown had begun, and the future was closer than ever before. With every step forward, Musk was one step closer to achieving his vision, a vision that would change the world forever. The next few months were a blur. Musk had always thrived under pressure, but now the pressure felt different, more intense, more suffocating. With Starship's progress on track and the upcoming test flights slated for the next few weeks, there was little room for error. It wasn't just about launching rockets anymore. It was about the future of humanity. Mars wasn't some distant dream. It was becoming a tangible, reachable goal. Yet, with every step forward, the stakes grew exponentially. Musk had become accustomed to the never-ending firestorms of media attention, but now it was more than just the usual scrutiny. The legal battles with the SEC were still ongoing, and every move Musk made seemed to be under a magnifying glass. There were whispers that his aggressive approach to managing his companies was starting to wear on him, and some speculated about whether he was truly ready for the massive challenge of leading a multi-billion-dollar enterprise while attempting to colonize Mars. Musk could hear the questions being asked, even though they weren't spoken directly to him. Was he too obsessed with the future? Was he sacrificing too much in the present? On a brisk morning in January, he found himself sitting in his office, staring at a new batch of Starship blueprints. His mind was racing through 1,000 different scenarios, but it kept returning to one thought. Failure wasn't an option. Elon, we need you to sign off on the final test flight schedule. Gwynne Shotwell's voice broke through his thoughts. Musk looked up to find her standing at the door of his office, arms crossed, concern etched on her face. Gwynne had been with SpaceX since its earliest days, and she knew Musk better than almost anyone. She could read the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of everything he was carrying. But there was no time for weakness now. Yeah, I know, Musk replied, rubbing his temples. It's all piling up, Gwynne. I've got the SEC breathing down my neck. Starship's testing schedule is tighter than ever, and then there's everything going on with Tesla's expansion. It's too much. Gwynne stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. I've seen you under pressure before. You've handled worse. But you need to pace yourself. You can't do everything at once, Elon. He smiled faintly. You're probably right. But how can I just sit back when we're this close to something that could change everything? Gwynne sat down across from him. I get it. You want to make history. But you have to remember, even history makers need rest. You're running on fumes. SpaceX and Tesla need you at your best, not at the brink of burnout. Musk leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. I'll rest when we're on Mars. When we've made the leap to sustainable energy, and when humanity is on a path to a better future. Right now, there's too much at stake. He glanced at the papers on his desk, the blueprints for the upcoming Starship tests, and the detailed data points for Tesla's upcoming launch of new electric vehicles. The weight of all of it seemed to press down on him at once. Yet, there was an underlying determination in his eyes, an unshakable belief that the work he was doing was more important than any personal sacrifice. I know you've got a lot to handle right now, Gwynne said softly, but you can't be everything to everyone. Delegating doesn't mean giving up control. It means setting up others to succeed. I'm here for that. SpaceX is here for that. We're all in this together. Musk nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He had always been a man who took on the lion's share of the responsibility, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to start trusting his team even more. They had come so far because of their collective effort. Maybe it was time to let them take the reins a little more. You're right, Musk said, his voice quieter now. I've been so focused on pushing forward that I've forgotten to lean on the people who helped get us here. Maybe I need to step back and refocus, at least for a little while. Gwynne smiled. Good. And don't worry, you're not in this alone. By the time the final countdown for Starship's upcoming test flight began, Musk had made a few important changes in his approach. He still maintained his high standards for the mission, but he had started to delegate more responsibilities to his trusted leadership team. It was difficult to let go of control, but he knew it was necessary for the company's continued success and for his own well-being. The day of the test flight arrived. The atmosphere was electric at the SpaceX launch site in Boca Chica. Teams were bustling with last-minute checks and preparations. Musk stood on the observation deck, his eyes fixed on the massive rocket standing tall on the launch pad. There was something magical about seeing Starship, SpaceX's flagship vehicle, ready for launch. But today, the weight of everything hung heavy on him. This test was critical. If they succeeded, it would be a monumental step closer to the goal of Mars colonization. If they failed, it could set them back by years. But Musk didn't have time to dwell on the potential failure. There was no room for doubt, no room for hesitation. He'd learned that early in his career. Hesitation was the enemy of progress. The countdown clock ticked down. 10, 9, 8. Elon, Gwynne said, her voice calm yet firm. You know, there's no one else I'd rather have leading us into this next chapter. Musk turned to her, offering a quick smile. Thanks, Gwynne. Let's make history. As the countdown reached 0, the engines roared to life, and the rocket began its slow, deliberate rise into the sky. The roar of the engines was deafening, shaking the ground beneath them. Musk could feel the vibration in his chest, but his gaze was locked on the sky. SpaceX was once again defying the impossible, pushing humanity closer to the stars. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. The test flight was a success. The rocket soared higher, faster, and more efficiently than ever before. The cheers from the team were thunderous, but Musk stood still, watching the rocket disappear into the blue sky. He wasn't celebrating just yet. This was just the beginning. As the months passed, Musk's life continued to unfold in a whirlwind of successes, challenges, and an ever-growing workload. The Starship test flight had marked a crucial milestone, but the road ahead remained long and uncertain. Each victory was tempered by the realization that with great success came an even greater responsibility. And as the public's expectations soared, so did the weight on Musk's shoulders. The media buzz surrounding the Starship program was unrelenting. Headlines seemed to scream in bold fonts about his dreams of colonizing Mars, about the groundbreaking technology he was creating, and about how his companies were shaping the future. Yet, despite all of the praise, Musk couldn't shake the feeling that something was always just out of reach. The more he accomplished, the more he felt the pressure mounting from all sides. He had always been the type to thrive on pressure. After all, the collapse of Zip2 and PayPal had been a nightmare in its own right. But each new venture brought new risks, new challenges. Now, with SpaceX's future on the line, with the Tesla revolution in full swing, and with his legal battles still lingering in the background, the weight felt heavier than ever. But Musk wasn't one to back down. He never had been. Still, even the most tireless of visionaries need a break. One evening in early spring, after weeks of back-to-back meetings and testing, Musk finally took a rare moment to himself. It had been a long time since he'd stepped away from his work, and though he could feel the pull of the inevitable emails and messages, he allowed himself to escape to a small cabin near the coast. He sat on the balcony overlooking the crashing waves, the sun setting over the horizon. The air was crisp, the scent of salt water lingering in the breeze. For the first time in ages, Musk felt a rare sense of calm wash over him. He let the sound of the ocean soothe his mind, pushing away the constant hum of his companies and the world that demanded his attention. The distant calls of seagulls seemed almost like a lullaby. But just as he was beginning to embrace the quiet, his phone buzzed, jolting him out of his moment of peace. Reluctantly, Musk pulled it from his pocket. It was a message from Gwen. Test results came in. There's a potential issue with the fuel tank in the Starship prototype. The readings are off by 1.5% from the last test. We need to discuss this immediately. Musk's heart skipped a beat. After all the progress they had made, all the tests they had completed with such precision, this was the last thing he wanted to hear. His mind immediately shifted gears, abandoning the moment of tranquility he had just found. "Understood," he replied quickly, his fingers tapping out the message. "I'll be back in the office tomorrow. Let's sort it out then." But the truth was, he wasn't sure he could simply switch off the way others did. The drive to fix things, to solve problems, was ingrained in him. And with every failure, no matter how small, the fear that the vision of Mars and the future he was creating might slip away gripped him tighter. The next morning, Musk was back in the thick of things. The morning flight back to headquarters felt surreal after the calm he'd experienced just hours earlier. As his private jet cut through the sky, Musk thought back to his conversation with Gwen. The fuel tank issue was minor, but for someone like Musk, no issue was truly small. One minor flaw could lead to something much larger. And when it came to Starship, when it came to Mars, the stakes could not be higher. As soon as he touched down, he was whisked away to SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne. Walking into the building, Musk's mind was already racing through the possible causes and solutions. Gwen met him at the door, her expression serious but not alarmed. She was used to handling crises with poise, and Musk appreciated her calm under pressure. "We've double-checked everything," she said, leading him into the command center. "But the readings are still off. We're making small adjustments, but I think we might need to delay the upcoming launch." Musk frowned, but he wasn't surprised. Delays were inevitable in a program of this scale, but they were never easy to accept. He couldn't afford any setbacks, not when the entire world was watching. How much time? Musk asked, his voice strained but measured. Gwyn glanced at the engineers gathered around the control panel. It could be a few weeks. We want to make sure this doesn't lead to something bigger, something we can't fix in time. Musk's mind raced. He knew that no one outside of SpaceX truly understood the complexities of building the next generation of spacecraft. Starship wasn't just about rockets. It was about creating a sustainable means of human space travel. Every detail mattered, and when it came to something as important as the fuel tank, there was no room for error. "All right," Musk said, his voice steady. "Do whatever it takes to fix this. I want that launch ready as soon as possible." The next few weeks passed in a blur of technical fixes, recalibrations, and testing. For Musk, there was little time to breathe. Every day brought new challenges, and with every test, the stakes seemed to grow. As the team worked tirelessly to prepare for the next test flight, Musk threw himself back into the grind. He barely slept, and his meals were often consumed while he was on the phone or reviewing documents. Every waking hour was consumed by the mission. The mission to push the boundaries of space travel and create a future where humans were no longer confined to Earth. But the toll was becoming evident. There were days when Musk could hardly keep his eyes open, when the mental exhaustion threatened to pull him under. He had been living in the fast lane for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to slow down, to take a breath, to step back. But even when he did try to pull away, the weight of the task at hand called him back. One evening, as the Starship team wrapped up another round of testing, Musk stood alone on the observation deck, staring up at the night sky. The stars were out in full force, a sea of glittering lights stretching across the heavens. In that moment, the immense weight he carried seemed to lift just a little. The vastness of space, the endless possibilities of what lay beyond Earth, made all the challenges seem somehow smaller. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but he knew this journey wasn't just about reaching Mars. It was about the human spirit, about pushing past the impossible, about seeing beyond the horizon. For a brief moment, he felt peace again. But then, as always, the reality of the mission set in. He opened his eyes, and there was work to do. Always more work. As the Starship test flights continued to make headlines around the world, Musk's attention was pulled in another direction. One that was perhaps just as important, but far more exhausting. The ongoing legal battles with the SEC, the same entity he had sparred with years earlier, were beginning to rear their head again. The conflict wasn't something he had time for, but it was something he had to face. It started months ago, when Musk's infamous tweet about taking Tesla private had rocked the financial world, sending his company's stock on a wild ride. The SEC had come down hard, and Musk had settled the charges by agreeing to step down as Tesla's chairman for a brief period and pay a hefty fine. But the issue wasn't closed, not by a long shot. The regulatory body was still keeping a close watch on his every move. And now, they had started digging into SpaceX's finances as well. Musk had always brushed off the critics and the suits, focusing instead on his work, on the dream of colonizing Mars, on creating a sustainable future for Earth with electric vehicles, on the companies that had become his life. But this new wave of legal scrutiny felt different. It felt personal. On a late afternoon in early June, Musk was in his office at Tesla headquarters, reviewing the latest round of test results for the new Cybertruck. The factory was buzzing with activity, but Musk's mind wasn't focused on the trucks. It was on the looming court case. The SEC had sent another round of subpoenas to Tesla and SpaceX, requesting more documents, more answers about his management style and whether it had affected shareholder interests. They weren't interested in the innovations of his companies. They were only interested in finding fault, in digging into the fine print of every decision Musk had made. "Elon," Gwyn's voice broke through his thoughts as she entered his office. "We need to talk. The SEC case, it's heating up again." Musk leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. He could feel his heart rate spike. "What's the latest? Another subpoena?" Gwyn nodded. "They want more information from SpaceX's financials, and there's a request to interview some of our key team members. They're taking a closer look at everything, including stock transactions and your communications with the board. Musk let out a low sigh, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The never-ending cycle of scrutiny had become a constant shadow in his life. His passion for innovation, his drive to create the future, had always been clear, but it was difficult to see that when every action he took was met with intense legal and financial examination. How do you think it's going to play out? Musk asked, his voice flat. It's hard to say, Gwen responded. They're not letting up. I think they're hoping to catch you on a misstep, any misstep, no matter how small. Musk gritted his teeth. I won't give them that. We've done everything by the book, every step of the way. If they want to drag me through the mud, they can try. But I'm not going to let them distract me from the real mission. Gwen gave him a sympathetic look. I know you're not, but the pressure is starting to mount. It's not just the SEC anymore. The media is starting to pick up on this again. There's talk of you being in trouble, and it's affecting public perception. We need to get ahead of it, Elon. We need to make sure that while they're chasing shadows, we're still focused on our goals. Musk knew she was right. The SEC wasn't going to stop its investigations. There was no way around that. But he wasn't about to let their relentless pursuit sideline everything he had worked for. He had too much at stake, and he knew how to fight back. I'll handle it, Musk said after a beat. Just make sure we're prepared for the upcoming Starship test. I don't want any distractions. The next few weeks were a blur of legal briefs, meetings with lawyers, and endless rounds of media statements. Musk found himself juggling the demands of his companies while trying to stay one step ahead of the SEC's inquiries. It wasn't just the legal battles that wore on him. It was the constant pressure of maintaining an image of success while fighting back against those who wanted to tear him down. The public narrative was shifting, and that made him uneasy. Musk had always thrived under scrutiny. In fact, it had become part of his persona. But this time, the stakes felt higher. People weren't just watching his companies. They were watching him. His every word, every tweet, was dissected, analyzed, and scrutinized. The Elon Musk that the world knew was a symbol of innovation and risk, but it was also a symbol of controversy, of unorthodox behavior, and of rebellion against authority. Now, that rebellion was being challenged at the highest levels. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, Musk didn't flinch. The fight wasn't just against the SEC. It was against the very system that sought to control his vision. He had always believed that change required disruption, and sometimes, disruption meant breaking the rules. In the midst of this chaos, the Starship program was moving forward. The engineers were fine-tuning the fuel tank issues, testing new components, and preparing for the next big step. But Musk's focus, as always, was split. As much as he tried to keep the two worlds separate, legal battles and engineering breakthroughs, he couldn't escape the feeling that they were becoming inseparable. One evening, as he sat alone in his office at SpaceX, looking over the plans for the upcoming test flight, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from his legal team. Update. The SEC has filed a new motion to extend the investigation. They're asking for more of your personal communications over the past year. Musk's stomach dropped. The SEC was relentless. They were trying to find something, anything, that could be used against him. He knew he couldn't let this distraction derail him, but the weight of the legal battle was starting to take its toll. He set the phone down and stared at the blueprints in front of him. The intricate designs for Starship's next iteration were still full of promise. They represented everything he had worked for, everything he believed in, but now they were intertwined with the fight against the SEC. A reminder that no matter how high his dreams soared, the ground beneath him was still being pulled in different directions. He leaned back in his chair and sighed. The road to Mars wasn't just about rocket ships. It was about survival, about beating the odds, about perseverance in the face of overwhelming challenges. But maybe that was the point. He couldn't have one without the other. The fight for the future was never going to be easy. If it were, everyone would be doing it. Let them come, he muttered to himself, because in the end, the fight was just another part of the journey. As the legal battle continued to churn in the background, Elon Musk's focus remained fixed firmly on the future. The future that could only be realized through the success of SpaceX's Starship program and, eventually, the colonization of Mars. Despite the SEC's relentless investigations and the daily pressure from his multiple business ventures, Musk's eyes were always on the stars. However, every step forward with SpaceX seemed to bring with it an unrelenting series of setbacks. The test flights, while successful, were still far from perfect. Each failure, each slight misstep, only pushed back the timeline further, and Musk couldn't afford to waste time. His vision of a multi-planetary species could not wait. It was on a particularly exhausting day, after a particularly brutal round of meetings concerning the legal case, that Musk found himself once again sitting alone in the Starship prototype hangar. The vast expanse of the SpaceX facility stretched before him, with engineers and technicians bustling about, performing routine checks and calibrations. The sound of hissing pressure valves and clanking machinery filled the air. But in that moment, there was a haunting silence around Musk, a silence that matched the weight of his thoughts. He stood there for a while, staring at the massive steel structure looming above him, the vessel that was supposed to carry humanity's future to Mars. His mind raced as the ticking of the clock seemed to echo louder than the noises around him. "We're so close," he whispered to no one in particular. The idea of interplanetary travel was one of the greatest dreams of mankind. But as with all great ventures, it came at a cost. The pressure he felt wasn't just from his team, his shareholders, or the media. It was the pressure of the responsibility itself. He had put everything on the line for this. Not just money, not just time, but his entire life's work. The weight of that was always present in his mind, no matter how many successes he accumulated. Elon wasn't just fighting for progress. He was fighting against the fear of failure. Failure, in his mind, meant that humanity's dream of Mars was dead before it had even begun. It meant that everything he had poured his energy and resources into would be for nothing. That the skepticism of the world, the people who doubted him, would be validated. But he refused to let that happen. "Hey, Elon," a voice interrupted his thoughts, and Musk turned to see Gwen standing a few feet away. She was always calm, always collected, even when the stakes were as high as they were. "We've got a new report on the tank testing. The numbers are looking better. We might be ready for the next launch sooner than we thought." A spark of hope flickered in Musk's chest, and he straightened. "Let me see it." She handed him a tablet, and as he skimmed through the data, a sense of relief washed over him. The changes to the fuel tank system had worked. The pressure had finally been corrected, and the test data now indicated that the tank could withstand the necessary conditions for interplanetary travel. "Good work," he said, nodding in approval. "It's about time we got something positive." Gwen smiled, but there was a look of concern behind her eyes. "There's still the issue with the heat shield tests to deal with, and we need to make sure we're fully prepared for the upcoming certification." Musk rubbed his forehead, knowing that nothing would ever be perfect. There was always something that needed fine-tuning, but they were getting closer. The dream of Mars was no longer a distant, impossible idea. It was beginning to feel tangible, within reach. And no amount of legal trouble, media scrutiny, or technical delays was going to stop him from getting there. "Tell the team we're moving forward," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes, we're going to make this happen." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The engineers were working around the clock, testing and retesting every aspect of Starship. There were moments when Musk felt like he was swimming through a sea of constant problems, each one urgent, each one a potential roadblock. But in those moments, he found solace in the mission itself. The mission to make life multiplanetary. It was bigger than anything he had done before, and it was worth every bit of the sacrifice. One evening, as the latest round of testing was underway, Musk found himself in another meeting with his team. The engineers had gathered to review the progress, and it was time to make a decision about the timeline. "The next launch window is coming up," Gwen said, looking directly at Musk. "Do we go for it?" Musk took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. The team was ready, but were they ready enough? Every decision was fraught with risks, and he couldn't afford to make the wrong choice. "We go for it," Musk replied decisively. "We've pushed through the problems, and now it's time to see if all the work pays off." The weeks that followed were a blur. The team had ironed out the remaining issues with the fuel tank and heat shield, and Starship was finally ready for the next test flight. The public and media had been buzzing about the upcoming launch for months, but Musk's focus remained unwavering. There was still work to do. Real, hard work. As the countdown for the test flight began, Musk stood with his team in the control room, watching the massive rocket on the launch pad. The air was thick with anticipation. Everything was riding on this flight. This wasn't just about testing the next iteration of Starship. It was about proving to the world that his vision was possible. As the final seconds ticked down, Musk felt the familiar rush of excitement and the familiar undercurrent of fear. Fear of failure. But it was a fear he had learned to embrace. Because it was that fear, that deep-seated understanding of the risks involved, that made him push forward. The engines roared to life. "Lift off!" the engineers cheered. Musk watched in silence, his heart racing as the rocket soared into the sky. This was the moment he had worked toward for so long. The realization of a dream that was now in motion, heading straight toward the stars. As Starship climbed higher into the atmosphere, Musk felt something inside him shift. It wasn't just the roar of the engines or the rush of the moment. It was the sense of purpose that had carried him through the hardest days. The fight wasn't just about technology. It was about the survival of humanity itself. And this mission? This was the future. The success of Starship's latest test flight should have been a moment of celebration. For most of the team, it was a triumph. Proof that the vision Musk had sold them on, despite the setbacks and criticisms, was beginning to bear fruit. But as Elon Musk stood on the balcony of the SpaceX headquarters, watching the rockets return to Earth after their successful flight, the high of the moment felt strangely muted. There was always something more to be done, always a new challenge on the horizon, and that thought consumed him as it always had. Musk's mind raced with the data from the flight. While the test was successful, he couldn't ignore the things that still needed work. The heat shield, the thrust vectors, the autonomous landing systems. Each component had to perform flawlessly for the Starship to carry out the real mission of reaching Mars. But for now, he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The team had done something extraordinary, and that deserved recognition. The following day, however, the same problem that always seemed to come for Musk reared its head. The SEC was back on the radar. He sat in a meeting with his legal team. A sea of paperwork spread out in front of him. They were discussing the latest round of subpoenas. The SEC was requesting more documents from both SpaceX and Tesla, particularly relating to their financials and their stock movements. A new investigation into Musk's personal communications had been launched as well. The pressure of defending his companies while simultaneously trying to push SpaceX's projects forward was beginning to feel overwhelming. Musk glanced up from the papers. How long can they keep this up? His lawyer, Robert, sighed, rubbing his temples. It's hard to say. They're relentless. This could drag on for months, maybe even years. They're looking for a reason to charge you again. And every new development, every tweet, it gives them more ammunition. Every time I try to do something that will make a difference in the world, they try to drag me down, Musk muttered under his breath. His words weren't just frustration. They were an admission of something that had been nagging at him for years. Every major project he had undertaken, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, had come with an endless wave of scrutiny, legal battles, and public criticism. It was a price he had paid for being bold, for pushing the limits of what was possible. But lately, it felt like no matter what he did, the noise around him was getting louder and more suffocating. Focus on Starship, Robert said, breaking Musk's train of thought. SpaceX has momentum right now. You can't afford to let these legal battles distract you. Musk nodded, though the thought of ignoring the SEC's probing felt impossible. He couldn't just pretend that they weren't out for him. They'd seen his success, his power, and now they were coming for him with a vengeance. But the mission had to come first. He had to keep moving forward. I know, Musk replied, his voice colder now, resolute. Let's put everything we have into this next test. We push Starship to its limits. I don't care about the investigations, the media, or the critics. We have to get this right, and we will. Mars won't wait. The weeks that followed were a blur of work, innovation, and setbacks. SpaceX had entered a critical phase in its mission to create a reusable rocket capable of transporting humans to Mars. Every test felt like it was pushing the team closer to their ultimate goal. Yet each test also seemed to invite new complications. A minor malfunction here, a delayed part there. It all added up. The pressure to succeed, to silence the doubters, was palpable. The clock was ticking, and with every tick, the stakes grew higher. By mid-July, the SpaceX team was working around the clock, trying to solve the latest problem with the heat shield that would allow Starship to survive re-entry into the Martian atmosphere. Musk spent most of his days in the lab, poring over blueprints and reports. But as the work continued, the public's eye on him grew ever sharper. News outlets were still covering the ongoing SEC investigation, using Musk's every move as fodder for their commentary. One evening, after a particularly grueling test of the heat shields, Musk found himself staring at the Starship prototype again. His gaze was tired, but the spark of determination was still there. He was ready to push forward, no matter what. "Hey, Elon, we've got a breakthrough on the heat shields," Gwen said, interrupting his thoughts as she walked into the room with a tablet in her hand. "The material's holding up better than expected under high temperatures. We're closer than ever to making this work." Musk looked up, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his lips. It wasn't much, but it was something. A sign that the months of relentless testing and innovation were finally paying off. "Great news," he replied, standing up. "Let's get the rest of the team on it. We'll need to take this to the next phase." Gwen hesitated before continuing. "You know, Elon, you've been pushing the team pretty hard. With the SEC case and all the pressure, I think we could use a bit of a breather. Maybe take a day to rest, step away for a bit." Musk's smile faded slightly, and he ran a hand through his hair. "I can't afford to take a break, Gwen. Not now. Not when we're this close. People are watching us, and I'm not about to let this slip through our fingers. We have to keep moving." He didn't want to admit it, but Gwen's words rang true. The pressure was taking its toll, both physically and mentally. But there was no time to stop. Musk had always lived by the mantra that if you want to change the world, you have to keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. "All right," Gwen said, nodding. "But just remember, we need you at your best. Not just for the team, but for yourself." The following morning, as Musk was reviewing the final checklist for the next round of tests, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end immediately grabbed his attention. "Elon, it's Greg from NASA. I need to talk to you." Musk straightened, his heart beating faster. NASA? Why were they calling him now? What's going on? Musk asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've been reviewing your Starship flight plans," Greg said. "We're interested in potentially collaborating with SpaceX for the next phase of Mars exploration. The pressure's building for a global effort to reach Mars, and we think a partnership could help us both get there faster." Musk felt a rush of excitement. NASA, one of the leading space agencies in the world, wanted to collaborate with SpaceX. This was exactly the kind of partnership that could propel the Mars mission forward. But there was still a catch. There was always a catch. "I'm listening," Musk said. "We want to make sure everything is up to code. We're not just talking about the rocket. We're talking about the systems you're developing for human survival on Mars. Safety is the priority." Musk exhaled slowly. Safety, of course. It always came back to safety. But it was a reminder of how far he had come. A reminder that his efforts were no longer just an ambitious dream. They were now part of the global conversation. "Let's talk more," Musk said, his resolve returning. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. The mission to Mars was no longer just about SpaceX. It was about humanity. And Musk knew that the road ahead would be harder than anything he'd faced before. Elon Musk sat at his desk, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him as the latest round of meetings wrapped up. The news of NASA's interest in collaborating on the Mars mission had spread like wildfire across the media, making headlines everywhere. Musk had expected excitement from his team, and they delivered. But behind the cheers, something else lingered: doubt. The doubt wasn't about the mission. That was clear. Musk's vision for Mars, the dream he had been building for over a decade, was as alive as ever. The challenge now was managing the delicate balance between SpaceX's ambitions, the complexities of a potential NASA partnership, and the ever-growing pressure from the SEC investigations. Musk leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk as he stared out the window. The world outside was calm, peaceful, but inside, his mind was a storm of thoughts and strategies. The SEC was still investigating his every move. With every success SpaceX achieved, it seemed there were more questions about his business practices, his tweets, and his leadership style. The constant legal battles were draining his time and focus, and there were days when the mountain of paperwork seemed insurmountable. But just as he was about to drown in his worries, his phone buzzed, interrupting his spiral. It was a message from Gwen. "We need to talk. There's something about the collaboration with NASA I think you need to hear." Musk sighed, his gaze flickering over the message. He had a sinking feeling in his stomach. The excitement about the partnership had barely begun, and already, it felt like there was a hitch. Setting his phone down, he composed himself and quickly made his way to Gwen's office. When he arrived, Gwen was sitting at her desk, her face set in a serious expression. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Elon," she began, "NASA is interested in the partnership, but they're laying down some conditions." "Conditions?" Musk asked, his voice low. "What do you mean?" "They want more control over the mission, more oversight," Gwen said. "They're worried about the timeline. They don't think we can pull this off as fast as we've promised. And they want us to tone down the public statements about how soon we can get humans on Mars." Musk felt a sharp pang in his chest. This was the last thing he wanted to hear. NASA's support meant everything, but if they were going to throw their weight around and slow things down, it could jeopardize everything he had worked for. "They want to slow things down?" he asked incredulously. "I'm not in this to play it safe. We've always been pushing boundaries. That's what people respect. That's why we're ahead. If we slow down now, we risk losing our edge." Gwen nodded in agreement, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "I get that, Elon. But NASA has the resources we need to make this happen. If we don't play ball, they could pull back completely." Musk's mind raced. He had no intention of slowing down, not when Mars was within reach. But he also knew how important NASA's involvement could be. Their knowledge, their experience with deep space exploration, could complement SpaceX's technological advancements. But there had to be a way to keep the momentum going, to not let anyone stifle the dream. "We need to find a middle ground," Musk said finally. "I'll meet with them. But we're not going to let them control this project. We have the expertise, the drive, and the vision. If they want to work with us, they'll have to keep pace with us. No slowing down. No compromises." Gwen smiled faintly, sensing Musk's resolve. "I knew you'd say that." The next few days were filled with tense preparations for the meeting with NASA. Elon and Gwen worked tirelessly, reviewing every aspect of the partnership, making sure SpaceX's interests were firmly represented. When the meeting with NASA finally arrived, Musk was ready to lay down the law. As he walked into the meeting room, a sense of anticipation filled the air. Representatives from NASA, including Greg, were seated around a large conference table. They greeted Musk with polite smiles, but there was an undercurrent of skepticism in the room. "Thank you for meeting with us, Elon," Greg said, his voice neutral. "We've been reviewing the details of your Starship program, and we think there's a lot of potential for collaboration." Musk didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Potential is one thing, but we need to be clear. SpaceX will lead the charge. We're not slowing down for anyone. If we're going to partner, it has to be on our terms." Greg raised an eyebrow, a slight edge to his tone. "We're not asking you to slow down, but we do have concerns about the pace you're setting. We have to be realistic about safety, about timelines, and we need to ensure that the mission remains feasible." Musk's eyes narrowed. He could feel the tension building. NASA was pushing for caution, but his entire career had been built on the belief that the future of humanity didn't have time to wait. "We've been realistic about safety from day one," Musk shot back, his voice calm but firm. "Every test, every failure, every success, we're learning, and we're pushing. There's no room for slow and steady here. Not when lives are at stake. Not when the future of humanity is on the line." Greg leaned forward, his fingers steepled together. "We respect your drive, Elon, but SpaceX has a history of rushing things. The pressure to meet these deadlines can cloud judgment, and that's not something we can overlook." Musk felt a surge of frustration, but he kept his cool. He had heard these concerns before. Every step forward had been met with resistance, whether it was from traditional aerospace companies or governmental agencies like NASA. "Listen," Musk said, his voice hardening. "SpaceX is not a company that plays by the old rules. The traditional way of doing things isn't fast enough to get us to Mars. If you're not willing to move at the speed necessary, then maybe this partnership isn't right." The room fell silent, the weight of Musk's words hanging heavy in the air. After a long pause, Greg finally spoke. "We're not saying we won't work with you, Elon, but we need to find common ground. We need to ensure that we don't sacrifice safety or long-term feasibility for the sake of speed." Musk exhaled, his mind racing. He couldn't afford to let them stall this project. He had come too far, and too many lives were at stake, not just on Earth, but on Mars. "Let's find that common ground," Musk replied finally, his tone softening. "But make no mistake, we're not slowing down. This mission is too important." As the meeting ended, Musk walked out of the room, his mind whirling. There was still no resolution, no certainty about the future of the partnership. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He would fight for the future of Mars with every ounce of energy he had. And no matter the hurdles in his way, no matter how many people doubted him or tried to slow him down, he wouldn't stop. Mars was his destiny, and he would make it happen. The weeks following the tense meeting with NASA felt like a tightrope walk. On one side, SpaceX's mission to reach Mars continued to accelerate, with more breakthroughs and tests taking place every day. On the other, the pressure from the SEC investigations and mounting public scrutiny was reaching its breaking point. Musk's every move was under a microscope, and the weight of the legal battles that he had been fighting for so long felt unbearable. The tension at SpaceX headquarters was palpable. Employees who once had boundless energy for the mission were starting to show signs of wear. The constant cycle of tests, failures, and corrections was taking its toll on everyone involved. The high-stakes nature of the work was pushing Musk's team to their limits, and even his usual indomitable optimism seemed to be faltering. Musk stood on the balcony of SpaceX's headquarters once again, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a rare moment of peace, but even in the stillness, his mind was racing. He had always known the road to Mars would be difficult, but now, more than ever, it felt as though the world was conspiring against him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was another message from Gwen. "The SEC is demanding a new round of documents. They're coming after you harder than ever." He read the message twice, the words sinking in. The SEC had already been digging into his past business practices for months, but now, it felt like they were closing in on him with a renewed intensity. Musk's frustration flared, but he tried to remain composed. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not now, not when the stakes were higher than ever. Musk quickly dialed Gwen's number. "Tell me everything," he said as soon as she picked up. "They've sent another subpoena. It's for more financial records, more internal communications, and..." She paused before continuing. "Elon, they're trying to tie SpaceX's investments to some of your personal ventures, especially the things related to Tesla and Neuralink. They're looking for any hint of conflict of interest." Musk pinched the bridge of his nose, closing his eyes as he processed the information. "Are they still going after me personally?" "They are," Gwen confirmed. "It's getting more aggressive. There's even talk of more lawsuits, potentially. If this keeps up, it could become a serious distraction." Musk's grip tightened on the phone. The familiar sensation of being cornered, of being relentlessly pursued, washed over him. It was nothing new, but it didn't make it any easier to handle. Every time it seemed like he was making progress, the legal battles would rear their ugly head, throwing everything into chaos. "I'll deal with it," Musk replied through clenched teeth. "But I can't let this stop us. Not now. We're on the edge of something big, and I'm not going to let the SEC derail this." The next few days were a blur of legal meetings and increasingly tense interactions with the SEC. Musk had surrounded himself with a team of lawyers to handle the subpoenas, but it felt like the investigation was becoming more of a distraction with each passing day. Every time Musk sat down to work on the Mars mission, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was trying to pull him away from it. And then, one evening, as Musk was reviewing a report on Starship's upcoming launch, An unexpected visitor arrived at SpaceX's headquarters, a representative from the United States Secret Service. Musk's eyebrows furrowed when he saw the agent walk into his office. He had no idea what the visit was about, but the agent's serious demeanor suggested it wasn't going to be a casual chat. "Elon Musk?" the agent asked, his voice firm. Musk nodded, still unsure of what was happening. "We're here in connection with the ongoing investigations," the agent said, showing Musk a badge and introducing himself as part of the U.S. Secret Service. "We need to discuss something regarding your personal security." Musk stood up, a sense of unease creeping over him. "Security? Is this about the threats I've been receiving?" Or, the agent raised a hand, signaling Musk to remain calm. "It's not about threats. We've been tracking some movements around your personal assets. There are concerns that people might try to sabotage your projects, and we're here to make sure you're protected." Musk's mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenarios. In the world of high-stakes innovation, where billionaires clashed and companies fought for dominance, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that someone would go to extreme lengths to stop him. But he didn't want to dwell on the threat. He had bigger problems to focus on. "I don't need bodyguards," Musk said curtly. "I can handle myself. But if you're here to help SpaceX, then we're on the same side." The agent didn't respond immediately, but instead handed Musk a piece of paper. It was a list of recommendations for improving his personal security measures. As Musk scanned the document, his mind was already elsewhere. This was just another distraction. Another piece of the puzzle that was slowly threatening to unravel his focus on Mars. As the days passed, the pressure continued to mount. The SEC demanded more. The Secret Service remained a constant reminder of the dangers of his visibility, and his team at SpaceX was exhausted. But through it all, Musk continued to push forward. Despite the legal battles, despite the security concerns, and despite the mounting doubts from both outside and within his own organization, Musk knew one thing with certainty. His dream of Mars was the only thing worth fighting for. There would be no stopping him. No matter how many people tried to tear him down or drag him through the mud, he would keep moving forward. Mars wasn't just a project, it was his legacy, and no one would stand in his way. The last few months had been a whirlwind of pressure and progress, of triumphs and setbacks. Elon Musk stood in the center of the launch pad at SpaceX's headquarters, staring at the towering form of Starship as it loomed against the bright blue sky. This was it, the culmination of years of relentless work, countless failures, and the enduring belief that humanity's future lay among the stars. Yet, despite the magnitude of the moment, Musk's thoughts weren't on the rocket. They were on the uncertainty surrounding his mission and everything that came with it. In a few hours, Starship would embark on its most crucial test flight to date. This mission would mark the first true step toward Mars, a leap that would put SpaceX at the forefront of human space exploration. But this wasn't just a test of technology. It was a test of Musk's vision, his ability to persevere through legal battles, personal threats, and constant media scrutiny. His phone buzzed in his pocket, bringing him back to the present. The message was from Gwen. "NASA is on board. We're moving forward with the collaboration. This is the green light we've been waiting for." Musk's heart skipped a beat. NASA had finally agreed to the terms SpaceX had laid out. It was the validation he had fought so hard for. The recognition that SpaceX wasn't just a space company, but a force of nature capable of reshaping the future of humanity. With NASA's support, the mission to Mars could go beyond the realm of possibility and into the realm of inevitability. He felt a rush of adrenaline, but it was fleeting. There was still so much to do, so much at stake. The SEC investigation loomed over him like a shadow. The media continued to scrutinize every move he made, and even now, as the test flight neared, there were whispers of doubt from competitors and skeptics alike. Despite everything he had accomplished, the world was still waiting for the moment when he would fail. But failure was no longer an option. Musk had burned too many bridges, made too many sacrifices to let this dream slip away. As the countdown to launch began, SpaceX's headquarters was a hive of activity. Engineers, scientists, and technicians hustled to ensure everything was in place. The rocket was ready, the mission plan was solid, and Musk's resolve was as strong as ever. The whole world had their eyes on SpaceX, waiting to see if Musk's vision would become reality. Gwen stood next to him, her eyes focused on the starship as the final checks were completed. "This is it," she said quietly. "Everything we've worked for comes down to this moment." Musk nodded, his gaze still fixed on the rocket. "We're going to make history today, Gwen. No matter what happens, we've already done more than anyone thought was possible." For a brief moment, Musk allowed himself to feel the weight of the achievement. SpaceX had defied the odds, proven that private companies could do what governments couldn't. They had come from nothing to change the face of space travel. But then the countdown continued, and the moment for sentimentality passed. 10 seconds, an engineer called out. Musk's heart pounded in his chest. The eyes of the world were on them. He knew the risks, the odds of failure were still high. But as the final seconds ticked down, he felt an unwavering certainty. This was it. The future of Mars was within reach. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The sound of the engines firing was deafening, the ground shaking beneath their feet as the rocket roared to life. Musk's eyes widened with awe as Starship rose into the sky, leaving behind a trail of fire and smoke. The test flight had begun. The first few moments of ascent were smooth. The rocket climbed steadily, cutting through the atmosphere with precision. The engineers and technicians around Musk cheered, watching the telemetry closely, ensuring every system was functioning as expected. But then, just as the rocket passed through the stratosphere, something unexpected happened. A warning light blinked on the control panel, followed by another. "Are we losing telemetry?" Musk asked, his voice low but steady. "No," came the quick reply. "There's some interference, but we're still on track. It's just a blip." Musk clenched his jaw. He had faced failure before, and it didn't scare him. But the stakes were too high today for anything to go wrong. The world was watching. They couldn't afford any mistakes. Minutes felt like hours as the rocket continued its ascent. Musk's eyes never left the screen in front of him. He was hyper-focused, watching the data streams with a laser-like intensity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the rocket reached the edge of space. The cheers in the control room were instantaneous. The mission was a success. SpaceX had done it. Starship had reached orbit. Musk let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were shaking, but there was no time for celebration. Not yet. The test was far from over. The next few minutes were crucial. As Starship orbited the Earth, the team began preparations for re-entry. Every detail had to go perfectly. If Starship couldn't safely re-enter the atmosphere, everything would be for nothing. Musk's mind raced through the data as he looked at the flight path. The re-entry angle, the heat shields, the velocity, every variable had to align. As the rocket descended back through the atmosphere, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone held their breath as Starship glided through the thinning air. Musk could feel his pulse quicken. And then, with a deafening roar, Starship deployed its parachutes and touched down safely on the ground. The mission was complete. They had done it. The room erupted into cheers. Musk stood silently for a moment, his eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to smile. It wasn't just a technical achievement, it was a promise to humanity. A promise that the future of space exploration was no longer a distant dream but a tangible reality. As the celebrations continued around him, Musk looked up at the sky through the glass windows. Mars, once a distant point of light in the night sky, now felt so much closer. This was only the beginning. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be more challenges, more setbacks, and more critics. But nothing could stop him now. Mars was within reach, and nothing was going to stand in his way. After years of perseverance, SpaceX has completed its most important test flight to date. With the success of the mission, the dream of Mars is now a reality. But as Musk looks toward the future, the road ahead remains full of uncertainty. Will the triumphs of today lead to the fulfillment of his vision, or will new challenges arise to threaten everything he's worked for? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?